Hi guys. Tonight, let us slip quietly through the mists of time, gliding across cold stone corridors, where the only sound is the echo of our imagined footsteps. We travel until we stand before a medieval castle, its immense towers frosted brilliant white by the very breath of winter. Snow drifts, deep and silent, pile along the battlements, and the wind howls a mournful tune, as if the very stones of the fortress are shivering in the relentless cold. You are not here as a mere visitor. You are stepping into the private, fragile world of kings and queens, into an era when winter transformed the simple act of sleeping into a nightly battle for sheer survival. Imagine this vast hall of stone. Yes, the same magnificent space that looks so majestic in the light of day, but as nightfall consumes the world, it becomes an echoing cave of icy, predatory drafts. Do you believe you would last long here without the comforts of modern heating? You likely wouldn't survive a single night. So, before you settle in, take just a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find solace and enjoyment in what I do here. And while you're there, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you in your part of the world. Now dim the lights. You step into the royal bedchamber, and the profound chill hits you like a physical slap of icy water. The walls are thick, it is true, but stone is a greedy material. It stores the cold like a miser hoards his coins. The torches in their sconces sputter and spit, casting a flickering golden light, yet their meagre heat seems to rise no higher than your knees. Even wrapped snugly in furs, you can feel that invasive bite creeping deep into your bones. A royal chamber is intended to be a place of splendor and power, but in the dead of winter, it feels like nothing more than a vast stone cavern. You can smell the air, a tapestry of scents woven from damp stone, the musk of wool, and a faint, stubborn trace of smoke that clings to everything, no matter how many fires burn. Look around you. Those vaulted ceilings soar high overhead, designed more for imposing grandeur than for human comfort. Their architectural beauty becomes a mockery in winter, because every powerful gust of wind finds a way to whistle through unseen cracks and narrow arrow slits. It is as if the castle itself possesses lungs, exhaling icy draughts directly upon its slumbering rulers. Historians continue to argue whether the architects of these fortresses deliberately sacrificed warmth for structural strength, or whether the concept of insulation simply never mattered to a people long accustomed to the cold. Either way, a king's immense wealth could not purchase a true escape from the frost. The grand bed waits at the far end of the chamber, a four-poster so massive it resembles a theatrical stage. Its drapes hang like heavy velvet curtains at a theatre, yet they are meant not for show, but for survival. The mattress is stacked thick, a lumpy concoction stuffed with feathers, straw, and whatever other padding could be procured. Still, when you press your palm down into its surface, it feels oddly uneven, a landscape of hidden hills and valleys. Luxury in those days was a relative concept. Compared to peasants sleeping on thin straw pallets beside a smoky hearth, this was paradise. Yet, this paradise still froze. Imagine the monarch disrobing, as servants fuss and flutter around them with layers of linen and fur. The ceremony of bedtime wasn't merely a ritual. It was a meticulous preparation for battle against the encroaching cold. A brazier smouldered nearby, sending lazy curls of smoke up toward the canopy. The air around it smelled metallic, tinged with the sharp scent of ash. The great fireplaces crackled, but their flames were far too small, too insignificant, to chase away the deep, abiding cold of a chamber large enough to echo a single footstep. You tug your cloak tighter around your shoulders and wonder how anyone could possibly find sleep here at all, but sleep they did. Kings and queens were as human as you are, needing rest to plot wars, to sign decrees, or to simply endure the crushing monotony of endless ceremony. And so, they curled into beds built like fortresses within a fortress. Each heavy curtain was tied securely shut to trap precious body heat. Outside the drapes, the room remained an icebox. Inside, if you were fortunate, you might discover a small, cherished pocket of warmth. A mainstream historical fact finds its place here. Edward III of England, who reigned during the harsh 14th century, was documented to possess grand beds, layered with multiple quilts and luxurious fur throws. Even so, complaints about the pervasive cold are noted in his personal accounts, reminding us that wealth only softened but never truly erased the discomfort. Quirks abounded too. One lesser-known tidbit reveals that some royals slept with dogs at their feet, not simply for companionship, but as living, breathing foot warmers. A noble lapdog, or even a sturdy, loyal hunting hound, could provide more consistent comfort than any feather quilt. Picture that for a moment. The great ruler of vast realms, a figure of immense power, relying on a panting dog to keep his toes from freezing solid. As the night deepens, you breathe out, and you can see the white fog of your own exhalation. Frost begins to creep across the corners of the stained glass windows, tracing delicate, crystalline veins of white against the dark glass. You tug at a curtain, peering outside into the night. Snowflakes drift past, silent and endless, as if the entire world has decided to surrender to sleep. Inside, however, the castle is never truly quiet. Guards clank along the battlements, their armored boots echoing through the stone, while servants shuffle heavy logs to the hearths. All that noise is muffled by the thick walls, but it serves as a constant reminder that royalty never truly slept alone. Your fingers brush against the cold wood of the bed frame. Even here, in this heart of power where crowns gleam and royal banners hang, winter is an uninvited guest who never, ever leaves. You begin to realize how fragile comfort truly is, how sleep itself becomes a privilege, one that must be guarded fiercely against stone, wind, and frost. And as you nestle deeper into this imagined bed, hearing the low hum of the wind beyond the curtains, you begin to understand a fundamental truth. To be royal was not to escape hardship, but merely to endure it with better blankets. You shuffle closer to the shuttered wall, where the great stone blocks rise like frozen sentinels guarding the night. At a first glance, you might believe such thickness would guarantee warmth, but the truth is precisely the opposite. The stones themselves behave like icebergs, soaking in every ounce of cold from the winter air and holding it hostage for months on end. You run your hand along the wall, and it is so profoundly chilled that you half expect your skin to stick to its surface. The draft doesn't just seep in through the walls, though. It finds sly, insidious ways inside through the narrow slits carved for archers, through imperceptible gaps in the wooden shutters, through the very mortar that binds the blocks together. You glance at one of those arrow slits. Now, in the daytime, it is a clever defensive feature, tall and narrow, allowing archers to shoot while remaining protected. But at night, in the depths of winter, it transforms into a cruel needle through which the wind stabs mercilessly. The shutters are bolted tight, yet you can still hear a faint, high-pitched whistling, like a mournful flute playing a lonely tune. Each gust rattles the heavy iron fittings, and every rattle makes you imagine lying awake, staring into the oppressive dark, waiting for a warmth that never truly arrives. Historians still debate whether medieval builders simply underestimated the insidious power of drafts, or whether they accepted that castles were military machines first, and homes a distant second. Either way, the royal family had little choice but to endure. To counter these icy arrows of air, tapestries were hung thick across the walls. You can picture them now, massive woven scenes of royal hunts, pious saints, or mythical beasts. Their threads are vibrant and rich in the daylight, but at night their purpose is purely practical. They are shields of wool and silk, meant to soften the harsh echoes of the chamber while muting the relentless drafts. Still, no tapestry, however thick, can completely silence the persistent sigh of the winter wind. You lie back and imagine the sound, a constant, low moan that seeps into your dreams. Here's a solid historical fact. In many castles, including those of France and England, tapestries were not just decoration, they were essential insulation. Accounts from the 15th century show that monarchs spent enormous sums commissioning these vast wall hangings, partly to impress their visitors and partly to keep their teeth from chattering. Yet, a quirky detail remains. Some of these tapestries were mobile, moved from castle to castle as the monarch travelled, rolled up like enormous heavy rugs, then hung again in each new hall. Imagine the servants groaning under the immense weight of that task. The shutters themselves deserve your attention. Fashioned from solid oak or iron, they were built to withstand both arrows and storms, yet they rarely sealed the window frames fully. You can picture the monarch lying awake, hearing the subtle clink as the shutter shifts against its frame with every powerful gust. You wonder, did queens ever ask their attendants to stuff scraps of wool into the cracks? There are scattered notes suggesting this, though there is no certainty. Scholars debate whether these little improvisations were common practice or just exceptional, desperate solutions. Even so, inside those heavy beds with their curtains drawn shut, the drafts could be momentarily defeated. You imagine lying within that cocoon, hearing the wind shriek against the stone walls, while feeling the comforting weight of furs pulled tight around your shoulders. The contrast is strange, a pocket of comfort nestled within a world of hardship. The richer the monarch, the thicker the bedding, the more numerous the tapestries, the heavier the shutters. Yet the basic battle always remained the same: the castle versus the cold, the monarch versus the draft. A fringe tidbit whispers here, too. Some rulers ordered reeds or even straw to be stuffed between the stones in especially draughty chambers. It was a crude, temporary, and messy form of insulation, but perhaps it helped. Imagine the potential embarrassment of a great king relying on bundles of straw jammed into his own royal walls. Yet, desperation knows no rank. As the night deepens, you picture your own breath rising in the cold air, mingling with the sound of the rattling shutters. Sleep would not come easily, not even for a queen. You shift beneath the covers and realize that comfort in a medieval castle was never a given. It was always negotiated, fragile, and hard-won, and every relentless draught that found its way past a narrow slit was a stark reminder: no wall, however mighty, could ever keep the winter out entirely. You turn your gaze toward the undeniable centerpiece of the chamber, the bed. It towers above the cold stone floor like a monument, its thick posts carved from ancient wood that rise toward the vaulted ceiling, each one polished to a dull sheen by the touch of countless hands. This is not merely a place to sleep. It is a profound statement of power. The royal bed is, in essence, a room within a room, its curtains woven heavy enough to block out the intrusive light, and more importantly, to trap any fugitive warmth. You take a cautious step closer, the old wooden boards beneath your feet creaking a soft protest, and suddenly the intimidating vastness of the chamber feels less overwhelming. Here, cocooned within this fortress of wood and fabric, the monarch would face the long, cold night. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that medieval kings and queens often slept in four-poster beds so magnificently grand that servants required steps just to climb onto them. You can picture this now. A mattress piled thick with countless layers, rising to a height where a small child could simply vanish into its folds. The climb itself became part of the evening ritual, as attendants studied their monarch while they mounted the bed, much like a knight might mount a war horse. What was intended as luxury for the royals often transformed into sheer spectacle for those watching. Look more closely. The mattress is not uniform and smooth like your modern one. It is a landscape of its own. Some are filled with the finest feathers, others with dense wool, and many are layered with coarse straw beneath a softer stuffing. It is lumpy, it is uneven, but it is the very best that was available. Wealth meant that instead of one thin layer, a monarch could stack many, turning the bed into a padded fortress against the cold. The result is that you sink deep into its folds, feeling as though you are being swallowed by the furniture itself. Yet, even here, comfort was subjective. Some kings reportedly preferred the firmer support of straw-filled bases. Others demanded plush feather beds, imported from distant lands at an absurd cost. Historians still argue whether personal taste or contemporary medical advice dictated these choices. After all, medieval doctors often claimed that certain materials helped to balance the body's essential humours. Then there is the frame itself. The posts are thick and solid, carved with powerful lions, intricate fleurs-de-lis, or solemn religious motifs. These carvings were never mere decoration. They signalled piety, lineage, and legitimacy. To lie in such a bed was not just to rest one's body, but to embody authority itself. This bed was where treaties were whispered into existence, where heirs were conceived, and sometimes where monarchs drew their final breath. You realize suddenly that these towering wooden frames carried more living history than most thrones. A quirky detail emerges here. In some castles, the beds were considered so valuable that they traveled with the monarch. Imagine the sheer absurdity of a royal entourage carrying not just trunks of clothing and jewels, but entire dismantled bed frames across muddy, treacherous roads. The royal bed was portable power, carefully reassembled in every new residence as a potent symbol of continuity. It meant that no matter how foreign or drafty the new chamber might be, the monarch would always sleep within the same familiar, protective wooden walls. Step closer still. The curtains hanging from the canopy are thick, woven from heavy wool, shimmering silk, or rich velvet, dyed in deep, regal colors reserved only for the elite. You brush the fabric with your fingers and feel its substantial weight, heavy enough to silence whispers and shut out the flickering candlelight. They are designed to be drawn tight against drafts, sealing the royal body within its own microclimate of warmth and scent. A unique aroma of musty fabric, faint smoke, and the lingering perfume of oils rubbed lovingly into the wood. Inside this cocoon, the king or queen could forget, if only for a few brief hours, the relentless frost that lay siege outside. But even here, within this sanctuary, inconveniences lingered. Without modern springs, the bed sagged where the supporting ropes stretched loose. It was the servant's duty to tighten the bed by pulling these ropes taut beneath the mattress, an arduous task that has given us the modern phrase, sleep tight. You smile at that, a common phrase of comfort, rooted in the forgotten grunt work of servants, whose simple job was to keep their monarch's spine straight through the night. You pause to consider how utterly surreal it must have felt. A monarch who commands armies and kingdoms, lying down like a vulnerable child, utterly dependent on attendants to fluff their pillows, arrange their furs, and chase away the drafts. Historians still debate whether this nightly vulnerability contributed to the elaborate rituals of the bedchamber, the processions, the prayers. The constant attendance meant as much to protect royal dignity as to provide simple comfort. And so, you imagine yourself lying here, the heavy curtains closing around you, the carved posts standing like silent sentinels of the centuries. Outside, the castle groans under winter's brutal assault. Inside, you are wrapped in authority, tradition, and the uneven lumps of an oversized mattress. It is grand, yes, but it is also oddly, profoundly human. For even kings and queens, in the end, had to wrestle with the same simple, pressing question. Will this bed keep me warm tonight? You lower yourself onto the bed now, and it almost swallows you whole. What strikes you first is not softness, but an immense geological weight. The bedding presses down upon you with the gravity of layered history itself. One quilt, then another, then heavy furs are stacked so high, you genuinely wonder if you might suffocate long before you ever feel warm. The sensation is comforting and oppressive all at once, a heavy, unyielding embrace meant to pin you down against the encroaching cold. The monarch lying here would sink under this profound burden, but perhaps that was precisely the point. Immobility meant warmth. A straightforward historical fact comes to mind. Surviving inventories from grand castles such as England's Hampton Court list as many as 7 or 8 distinct coverings on a single royal bed in winter. This mountain included feather mattresses, dense woolen blankets, heavy fur throws, and sometimes even lustrous silken quilts imported at great expense from Italy. This abundance was, of course, a symbol of immense wealth, but it was also a brutally practical shield against the frost. And then there are the quirky details. Have you ever heard of squirrel fur? In its time, it was called vair, a luxury material sewn into intricate patchwork linings for royal cloaks and bedding. Each tiny, precious piece came from the animal's belly, a pale blue-grey fur stitched meticulously into a shimmering mosaic. You might picture Cinderella's famous glass slipper, but in the original, older version of the tale, her slipper was fashioned from vair, a fur so precious that it glittered like moonlight in the candlelight. Now, imagine kings and queens lying beneath layers made of countless squirrel bellies, just to keep their toes from freezing. It is not quite the fairy tale, is it? You reach down and feel how uneven the landscape of the bedding becomes. Coarse wool blankets scratch against your skin, while silken covers slide away with the slightest movement. The furs themselves smell faintly of musk, the primal odor of the animals lingering no matter how carefully they have been treated. You wrinkle your nose, coming to the stark realization that medieval luxury was rarely clean. Historians still debate whether royal bedding was washed often or simply replaced, for the considerable risk of soaking wool and fur in water might ruin it entirely. Some argue that perfumed sachets and fragrant herbs, tucked carefully between the layers, served more to mask the persistent odor than to truly freshen the cloth. Servants would spend long moments preparing these layers. They fluffed the great feather beds, shook out the heavy quilts, smoothed the linens, and laid each fur precisely so that the seams did not overlap, preventing any drafts. You can imagine them working quickly, their own breath puffing in white clouds in the icy chamber as they rushed to finish before the monarch entered. The bed, in this context, became less an object of rest and more of a stage, set carefully each evening for the nightly drama of sleep. Now, you tuck yourself under the covers. The first blanket is scratchy wool. The next is oppressively heavy. The third is softer but slippery silk. And the fourth is almost suffocating in its density. By the time the final layers of fur are pulled on top of you, you are trapped, suspended in a sandwich of cloth and pelt. Your body heat slowly begins to build a fragile bubble of warmth, and the biting cold finally fades just enough for a welcome drowsiness to creep in. You think about how peasants, at this very same moment, were huddling together on thin straw pallets by smoky hearths, and suddenly this mountain of blankets feels almost divine in its opulence. Yet still, the cold seeps through. A stray draught brushes your cheek, a chilling reminder that no number of blankets could ever fully erase the deep, penetrating chill of the stone. And so, the monarch clung tighter, pulling the covers higher, burying nose and chin deep in fur, trying to simply vanish into warmth. Perhaps you have done the same on a bitter winter's night, buried so deep that you leave only a small breathing hole. The royal experience, for all its pomp and ceremony, was not so different. One last thought as you drift within these layers. Some monarchs were rumoured to sleep almost sitting up, propped against a mound of pillows. Scholars argue whether this was based on medical advice, thought to ease digestion and protect against bad humours, or if it was simply a physical necessity, since sliding flat beneath such heavy bedding could feel terrifyingly suffocating. Either way, you can picture a king leaning upright, his crown set aside on a nearby table, chin resting on his chest, buried beneath a treasure of squirrels and silk. Power never looked so bundled. You lie there, bundled beneath mountains of bedding, when you notice another detail of the royal night, what the monarch is actually wearing to bed. Forget your modern idea of thin cotton pajamas or a simple t-shirt. A king or queen of the Middle Ages stepped into bed clad like someone preparing for a drafty, all-night vigil. Long linen shirts, heavy nightgowns, and fur-lined caps were the absolute norm. You run your fingers over the imagined fabric. It is coarse against the skin, the weave loose but sturdy. The warmth it offers is uneven, but it is far better than nothing. A plain historical fact. In the 15th century, nobles wore nightshirts made from linen, or even silk if their wealth allowed. These were not simple garments. Some were intricately embroidered, others edged with fine lace, because even in the privacy of the bedchamber, appearances mattered. The queen's attendants might see her disrobe, and even in her slumber, she was meant to embody royal dignity. Now for something more curious. Fur-lined nightcaps. These odd little hats, sometimes ridiculed in later centuries, were utterly essential in drafty castles. So much heat escapes from the head, and so monarchs pulled on caps with soft flaps covering their ears, like medieval winter helmets designed for slumber. Imagine the mighty Henry VIII, a man famous for his swagger and authority, settling into bed with a snug little cap pulled down tight over his ears. It is an image both comical and deeply human. This layering was about more than just comfort. It was believed to protect one's health. Medical theory of the time warned against cold air entering the body through the pores while one slept. To be uncovered was considered dangerous. Historians still debate whether this belief was rooted in the real experiences of chill-induced illness, or if it was simply humoral theory shaping everyday practice. Either way, The royal wardrobe at night was a direct defense against both drafts and disease. Feel the linen shift as you adjust your position. It clings slightly with sweat, for while the air is cold, the bedding is oppressive. Woolen socks, and perhaps even leather slippers, complete the ensemble. Yes, shoes in bed. Not the soft slippers you might imagine, but sturdy house shoes to keep the feet warm on the icy, rush-matted floors when rising briefly in the night. It sounds absurd, until you recall that the stone floors could bite hard enough to make you yelp from a single barefoot step. Here comes a fringe tidbit. Some monarchs, especially in the colder northern courts, supposedly had special fur mittens for sleep. It is difficult to know how widespread this practice was, but a few scattered references mention it. Picture the royal hands, usually raised in benediction or signing decrees, now tucked into fuzzy gloves as though preparing for a snowball fight in their dreams. And yet, even with all of this, you can imagine the persistent discomfort. The nightshirt itches, the socks twist at the ankle, the cap slips, leaving one ear to the mercy of the freezing air. But without these things, the cold would creep in until sleep was impossible. So, the monarch tolerated the annoyance, trading elegance for survival. The chamber grows quieter as the hour deepens. Outside, the wind sighs against the shutters. Inside, the monarch shifts under countless layers, dressed almost as if to travel, never fully vulnerable, but never truly free of winter's grip. You realize now that royalty did not sleep as the portraits suggest. Naked and at ease, in soft, welcoming beds. They slept armored against the cold, draped in furs, their heads capped, their feet wrapped, their bodies held stiff in their heavy linens. Their crowns may have rested on tables beside them, but the undeniable weight of winter remained upon them all night long. The heavy curtains fall into place with a soft, final whisper, and suddenly the cavernous chamber transforms, feeling like an intimate tent pitched inside a vast cathedral. You are surrounded now, not just by fabric, but by deliberate strategy. Every pleat, every seam, every inch of this enclosure has a purpose: to trap precious warmth, to soften the harsh sounds of the stone castle, and to shield a slumbering monarch from the biting cold that creeps relentlessly through the fortress walls. When you run your hand along the inner lining, you notice how impossibly thick it is, rich velvet layered over dense wool, sometimes even quilted with additional padding for good measure. It smells faintly of dyes, of beeswax from candles, and of human breath, a complex mixture that tells you this fabric has worked hard through many long winters. Descriptions from the 15th and 16th centuries mention these bed hangings, not as ornamental, but as essential. In fact, surviving accounts from the court of Burgundy describe entire sets of curtains that cost more than the ornate furniture they enclosed, a stark reminder that in this era, warmth was valued more highly than wood. They were drawn tightly shut each night, fastened with thick cords or secured by weighted hems, so that even the most determined wind could not stir them. Within this fabric fortress, the monarch slept inside what was effectively a microclimate. Cold might rule the stone chamber outside the curtains, but inside, a fragile heat gathered from bodies, from nearby candles, and even from the slow, steady smoulder of a brazier. One peculiar detail comes to light. Some sets of these hangings were decorated with intricate scenes of lush gardens or sun-drenched summer hunts. Imagine lying inside, shivering beneath a mountain of furs, yet surrounded visually by woven flowers, graceful deer, and golden sunlight. It was a psychological trick, as much as it was decoration, a deliberate reminder of warmth in the dead of winter. The imagery may have offered a gentle comfort, or perhaps a cruel irony, depending on your mood at 3 o'clock in the morning. Experts still disagree on how effective these curtains truly were. Some believe the thick, layered folds could raise the temperature within by several crucial degrees, turning an unlivable stone vault into a tolerable cocoon. Others argue that they merely prevented direct drafts, but in doing so, left the air inside stuffy, heavy with the lingering sense of smoke and sweat. You can almost test it yourself. Breathe deeply within this enclosed space. The air is warmer, yes, but it carries a weight, clinging to your throat with a mixture of moisture and fine fabric dust. Servants had their critical roles here too. Before the monarch ever entered, attendants would meticulously check every tie, smooth each heavy fold, and ensure the canopy was perfectly secured. Imagine their quiet nervousness, knowing that if the king woke in the night complaining of a fluttering curtain, someone's entire career might hang by a single thread. The curtains could even serve a political function, for they granted a rare privacy. A ruler could conduct whispered conversations with a trusted advisor, receive a favored companion, or shield a sudden illness from the prying eyes of the court. The curtain was not just cloth, it was a barrier of power. An unusual practice noted in some courts was the use of perfume sachets tucked carefully into the deep folds. Lavender, rose petals, or other dried herbs would mingle with the heavy, musky smell of wool and velvet. The result was a strange cocktail of aromas, half apothecary, half barnyard, half chapel. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but to a medieval sleeper, it was a form of reassurance. Fragrance carried both spiritual and medical significance, believed to ward off the diseases carried on the night air. Now, imagine lying back as the curtains are fully closed. The chamber beyond simply vanishes. The draughty windows, the cold stone floor, the distant echo of a guard's boots, all of it disappears. Instead, you hear only the sound of your own breathing, muffled and softened by the cloth. The flicker of candles beyond the fabric dims into a soft, ethereal glow, like distant stars seen through fog. The sense of enclosure is absolute. You are in your own private world, a fragile sanctuary stitched together with thread. And yet, comfort was never absolute. The very fabric that protected you also absorbed the moisture from the breath of sleepers, from accidentally spilled wine, and from the insidious frost that condensed on its outer layer. Over time, the hangings grew musty and heavy. Some were replaced often, but others were mended and reused for decades. There are even records of monarchs passing down their bed curtains as valuable heirlooms. The thought may amuse you, crowns of gold are one thing, but a set of smelly old curtains as a royal treasure? Yet that was the reality of wealth, in a world where warmth was synonymous with survival. Contemporary inventories suggest that multiple sets of hangings travelled with the royal household, rolled carefully into massive trunks. One winter might call for the thickest velvet set, while a milder season might see the lighter silk, embroidered with elaborate hunting scenes. It was a wardrobe for the bed itself, as changeable and strategic as a king's own attire. This mobility reminds you how central the bed was. Wherever the monarch went, the curtains followed, ready to transform any cold stone room into a recognizable, comforting nest. You may pause now and imagine yourself pulling those curtains shut. They swish with a low, heavy sound, sealing you away from the world. You settle back, the layers of bedding pressing against your chest, the cap snug on your head, the socks warming your toes. The wind hammers against the shutters outside. But within this fabric cave, you feel almost safe. Almost. Because no matter how rich the curtains, no matter how thick the furs, the cold remains a constant, undeniable presence, pressing at the edges, reminding you that winter always finds a way in. It is a paradox you cannot escape. The grandeur of the setting versus the utter fragility of the comfort. A king might sleep beneath velvet embroidered with gold thread, yet wake in the night to see his own breath cloud the air. A queen might rest amid silks dyed in a rare, vibrant crimson, yet still shiver beneath her layers. Luxury did not defeat the cold. It only negotiated with it, buying a few precious hours of uneasy warmth. As you drift deeper into this image, your thoughts grow slower, like the embers in a brazier dimming from orange to a deep, soft red. The curtains sway slightly, stirred by the faintest, most persistent breeze, and you realize how thin the line truly is between royal splendor and simple, desperate survival. To be a monarch in winter was to live within a web of contradictions, clothed in immense power, yet vulnerable to drafts, wrapped in priceless silk, yet still trembling in the dark. And so, you close your eyes, cocooned in velvet, listening to the muted world outside, knowing that even kings and queens must first make their peace with the cold before sleep will finally come. The glow of fire catches your eye. Across the vast chamber, a great hearth smoulders with a stubborn, quiet determination, its flames licking weakly upward before collapsing back into a bed of embers. You walk toward it, drawn by the promise of warmth, But the heat seems shy, a timid creature hesitant to leave its stone circle. By the time you have crossed half the room, the profound chill reclaims its territory, wrapping around you once more. Fireplaces in castles were enormous, grand things, with hoods carved from solid stone and mantles heavy with ornament, yet their heat rarely matched their magnificent appearance. They roared brightly when first stoked with fresh logs, then quickly sulked, leaving the vast halls feeling as cold and desolate as caves. From surviving household accounts, we know that servants fed these fires constantly throughout the winter, dragging logs as thick as a man's arm through endless, drafty corridors. The cost of fuel was simply staggering. Records from Scottish castles mention entire forests being stripped bare for firewood during particularly harsh winters. The paradox is stark and clear. Kings could command armies, but they could never command fire to heat stone evenly. A curious custom emerges from this challenge. Sometimes braziers, portable metal bowls filled with glowing hot coals, were placed strategically near the bed. These heavy iron containers radiated warmth like miniature, captive suns. You can almost see them now, glowing a deep, pulsing orange, with lazy curls of smoke wafting upward. But imagine trying to sleep next to one. Sparks might spit and fly. The air would thicken with the taste of ash, and should the coals ever fall, fire could consume the precious hangings and blankets before anyone even woke. It was both a comfort and a constant danger, glowing too close for true peace of mind. Researchers remain divided on how effective these heating methods truly were. Some argue that the combination of a great fireplace and multiple braziers could lift the temperature just enough to make a room bearable. Others counter that most of the precious heat simply escaped into the high, vaulted ceilings, leaving the sleepers below almost as cold as before. You lean close to the flames now, your skin tingling with the immediate heat, but then you step back only a few paces, and the frost returns, quick as a predator, reclaiming its ground. One overlooked detail reveals itself not to your eyes, but to your nose: the smell. Fires fueled by common materials like tallow or peat gave off an acrid, biting smoke that clung to curtains, tapestries, and clothes. Imagine the royal garments, perfumed not by roses, but by the persistent scent of smouldering fuel. Some monarchs, of course, preferred fragrant woods like cedar or juniper, imported at great cost, partly for the pleasant scent and partly for the sheer prestige. To burn cedar in your hearth was to announce to the world that you were wealthy enough to perfume the very air with every flicker of flame. Another eccentric note: servants sometimes placed heated stones or bricks, wrapped carefully in cloth, deep beneath the bedding before the monarch retired for the night. You can picture the attendants hustling with iron tongs, slipping these warm bricks under the sheets like hidden, secret coals. The comfort they offered lasted only briefly, fading as the night deepened, but that first, shocking contact with warmth must have felt like absolute heaven. Now you linger near the fire, listening to it pop and sigh. The flames cast long, dancing shadows that leap across the stone walls, transforming into shifting giants in the dimness. The king or queen, lying beneath their curtains, would see these shapes flicker faintly and hear the soft crackle as part of their nightly lullaby. Was it comforting? Or did it stir a deep unease, as if the chamber itself were restless and alive? The accounts never say, and perhaps the answer depended on one's mood, on one's health, or on whether the fire felt protective or menacing that particular night. Picture yourself lying back in bed, hearing the servants enter softly to feed the fire at intervals. Throughout the long night, the scrape of iron tools against logs, the hush of their careful footsteps, the muffled thud of fresh wood. Even sleep was never truly private. Warmth demanded company. The monarch dozed while others laboured, a constant, living reminder that survival in winter was a communal effort, even for royalty. And still the cold lingered. The flames did their very best, but by morning a delicate frost would rim the windows, the tapestries would hang stiff with damp, and the breath of sleepers would cloud the air. Fire was merely a guest in the chamber, not its ruler. It gave what comfort it could, and then it surrendered to the stone. You lean back now, watching the embers dim. The glow fades, the shadows stretch longer, and the chill creeps closer, eager to reclaim its throne. In that moment, you realize that even kings and queens, wrapped in priceless furs, surrounded by braziers, their fires tended by servants through the night, never fully conquered winter. They merely postponed it until dawn. The fire dies down, leaving the chamber in a dim, uncertain half-light, and you notice a new presence, another scent asserting itself in the air, the thick, waxy smell of tallow. Candles stand in clusters on heavy iron stands, their small flames trembling whenever the wind sneaks through an unseen crack. They give just enough light to read a prayer book or to glimpse the embroidered canopy overhead, but never enough to truly chase away the shadows. And the smell, thick, waxy, almost greasy, clings to your nose and throat. Tallow was rendered from animal fat, and once lit, it filled the room with a unique pungency that mingled unpleasantly with the smoke from the hearth. Contemporary descriptions remind us that while clean-burning beeswax candles existed, they were costly luxuries reserved for grand feasts or sacred church services. In the privacy of the bedchamber, monarchs often had to rely on the cheaper tallow, unless a particular ceremony demanded splendor. Imagine a queen drifting off to sleep, her last waking vision not one of golden brilliance, but the stubby, smoky glow of sputtering tapers. Even in palaces, a stark economy crept into the night. One odd practice reveals itself in the constant flicker. The wicks of tallow candles sometimes hissed or sputtered, scattering tiny, dangerous sparks of hot fat. Attendants had to trim them regularly with special scissor-like tools called snuffers. You can picture a servant leaning over the king's bed at midnight, carefully clipping a wick while trying desperately not to wake him. The room would briefly darken, then brighten again with a steadier, cleaner flame. It was a small, silent choreography, repeated endlessly through the night, proof that even sleep demanded constant maintenance. Specialists still disagree about how much light a monarch truly wanted while sleeping. Some argue they preferred near-total darkness, as any excess flame would consume precious oxygen within the enclosed curtains. Others suggest that a faint candlelight was always left burning for reassurance, a tiny beacon to keep away fears of thieves, malevolent spirits, or a sudden illness in the night. You lean back now and watch the shadows sway, half comforting, half menacing, their shapes transforming into imagined faces if you stare for too long. Among the stranger details recorded is the use of perfumed candles. Certain courts experimented with wax, infused with herbs or spices, meant to sweeten the oppressive air. Imagine the scent of cinnamon drifting through a frigid chamber, or rose-scented smoke curling against the cold stone. The effect might have been pleasant at first, but the mingling of delicate perfume with tallow's greasy base must have been less than enchanting, a constant clash between luxury and reality. The light itself changed the psychology of the night. The candles burned low, their flames sinking as the hours passed, marking time in a way that early clocks could not. The slow, inevitable guttering of wax was like a faltering heartbeat for the room. You can see it now. A candle bends, wax pooling at its base, the flame shrinking until it finally gasps and dies. Darkness rushes in, thick and absolute, broken only by the faint orange eye of a distant brazier. How unsettling that must have been, to wake at 3 a.m. to find half your chamber had simply vanished into shadow, and the danger of candles near curtains posed a constant risk. Many devastating fires in castles began from a careless flame brushing against dry fabric. Servants had to be ever vigilant, shifting the candle holders further from the hangings, extinguishing the wicks before sleep deepened too much. Even royalty feared fire, for while the stone walls might stand, the very tapestries, furs and bedding that kept them warm were tinder, just waiting for a spark. Imagine yourself now, lying beneath the heavy covers, the curtain drawn. Beyond the cloth, the faint, unsteady glow of candles flickers. You can smell the fat and the smoke, and hear the occasional hiss of a wick. The flame sways when a draught slips in, then steadies again, like a living companion breathing softly beside you. It is both comfort and menace, both warmth and warning. You realize that light in the medieval night was never casual. It was fragile, costly, and deeply dangerous, a luxury balanced precariously on a wick. In this wavering, uncertain half-dark, kings and queens drifted into their dreams, knowing that each candle consumed their wealth with every inch of its burning wick. Sleep came not in silence, but in the quiet rhythm of fire and fat. It was the glow of necessity, dressed as luxury, and when the final taper died, only cold and darkness remained. The chamber is quiet now, save for the soft rustle of footsteps you almost didn't hear. A servant approaches the royal bed with a practiced, careful grace, carrying a long-handled pan filled with glowing embers. The metal creaks softly as it cools against the harsh winter air. This, you realize, is not for cooking, but for comfort. The warming pan, an invention that was both ingenious and deeply risky, was designed to be slipped between the frigid sheets just before the monarch lay down. The pan's lid rattles softly, and a faint, sharp smell of scorched linen drifts up from a spot where a careless touch came too close. From surviving household accounts, we know that warming pans and even heated bricks were common in noble households by the late Middle Ages. Servants would fill them with hot coals from the hearth, then hurry to the bed before the precious embers lost their heat. The goal was brutally simple: to banish the initial, shocking cold of icy sheets. Imagine the profound relief of sliding beneath the covers, not into a frozen void, but into a space pre-warmed by glowing metal. For a king or queen, that brief, fleeting moment of luxury must have felt priceless, worth all the wood chopped and coal burned to supply it. Yet one eccentric, dangerous twist always surfaced. Warming pans occasionally left singing marks, or even started small fires. There are scattered reports of scorched bedding, of smoke filling the royal chambers, and of attendants being severely punished for their clumsiness. You can picture the sheer, cold panic of a servant, realizing he had nearly set the royal bed itself alight, and the cold sweat that must have rivaled the winter chill outside. Comfort and catastrophe were separated by only a thin, vulnerable sheet of linen. Scholarly opinion remains divided on how widespread such devices truly were among the highest echelons of the elite. Some believe every winter night in a grand palace saw a silent parade of warming pans. Others think they were reserved only for the very harshest weather, being too laborious to prepare on a daily basis. What seems certain is that any form of portable heat was cherished wherever it appeared, for the great stone castles were relentless in their refusal to warm evenly. And there was another, far more intimate method. Servants themselves sometimes became living warmers. Attendants would occasionally climb into the royal bed, moments before the monarch, using their own body heat to soften the brutal sting of frozen linens. The practice might seem deeply humiliating to us now, but in the context of pure survival, it was ruthlessly practical. A living furnace, dismissed just before the ruler settled in for the night. Oddly enough, in some courts, favoured companions or even noble guests might also be invited to share the bed, less for romance and more for simple, desperate warmth. The royal body was rarely alone in its nightly struggle against the cold. Picture it. The queen enters her chamber. She dismisses most of her attendants, but two remain. They lift the heavy hangings, fan the warm air from the brazier inside, and then scurry away after making sure the bed is tolerable. She slides beneath the covers, greeted not by an icy shock, but by the gentle, fading warmth of a heated pan, or perhaps by the lingering imprint of a servant's own body. The relief must have been immense, though it was always temporary. Within an hour, the insidious cold would have seeped back in, demanding more layers, more closeness, more sheer endurance. One peculiar anecdote even suggests that certain monarchs had favourite servants known for preparing their beds to just the right temperature, prized not for their loyalty or wit, but for their delicate skill with glowing coals. Imagine your entire career depending on whether the king's feet felt pleasantly toasty. It is a scene both absurd and strangely human, a potent reminder that true power rested on a foundation of small comforts just as much as it did on armies. You draw the curtains around you now, closing off the view of the servant retreating with the empty cooling pan. The smell of smoke and coals lingers faintly in the fabric. You shift under the covers, grateful for a pocket of warmth that you know will soon fade, leaving you to wrestle with the cold once more. Even kings and queens, wrapped in priceless silks and squirrel fur, relied on glowing pans and nervous attendants to soothe them into sleep. Wealth did not eliminate the chill. It only brought them brief, fragile reprieves. And as you close your eyes, you realize that in this world of stone and frost, survival was always stitched together by such fragile measures. Coals in a pan, hands arranging furs, curtains pulled tight. Royalty did not command the cold. They bargained with it, night after night. You shift under the immense weight of the quilts and hear a faint movement nearby. The bed is not a solitary refuge tonight. It is shared. For us, the idea of privacy and sleep feels deeply natural, almost sacred. But in the Middle Ages, beds were often places of politics as much as they were for rest. Monarchs frequently shared them, not just with their spouses, but with trusted nobles, attendants, or even visiting foreign guests. Heat was one obvious reason. More bodies meant more collective warmth. But the practice also spoke volumes about status and trust. To be invited beneath the royal canopy was to be marked as intimate, favoured, and indispensable. Evidence from various chronicles tells us that important visitors sometimes slept in the same chamber, or even in the very same bed, as their host monarch. This was not considered scandalous. Rather, it was a powerful ritual of bonding. Sharing blankets could forge alliances as effectively as any signed treaty. Imagine two powerful kings, lying side by side in the dim light, speaking softly as the embers glow, their quiet words weaving agreements more binding than any written on parchment. The intimacy of the bedchamber became a form of political theatre. One curious account describes Edward II of England sleeping with his favourites, not in secrecy, but openly, under the watchful gaze of his court. Whether for companionship, warmth, or a demonstration of trust, the royal bed was rarely just a place to close one's eyes. It was a living symbol of connection. Oddly enough, even queens sometimes slept with their ladies in waiting, pressed close together, both to share body heat and to preserve a sense of security in the vast, echoing chambers of the night. Historians continue to question how common this practice was across different courts. Some argue it was routine. Others suggest it was more situational, reserved for long journeys, delicate negotiations, or those bitterly cold seasons when survival simply trumped etiquette. But what is clear is that the solitude we take for granted was an extreme rarity for royalty. Their every breath was witnessed, their every turn in bed noted. Sleep was a communal act, wrapped in complex layers of hierarchy. There were lighter customs too. In some courts, dogs would nestle into the bedding as additional, furry companions. Small lapdogs would warm the feet while larger hunting hounds might stretch out across the lower covers. You can almost feel the reassuring weight of a drowsy dog pinning down the quilts, its gentle warmth seeping into your frozen toes. A monarch who commanded castles and armies also relied on the simple, honest body heat of animals. It is a scene both humbling and deeply endearing. Imagine the sounds of such a night: a queen sighing softly, a lady in waiting murmuring a quiet prayer, a dog shifting in its sleep, its claws clicking against the wooden bed frame. The great bed creaks with each small movement, but the heavy curtains mute the noise, creating a world within a world. You lie there, listening, keenly aware of the closeness of others, feeling both comforted and perhaps constrained by their presence. There is safety in numbers, but there is also a certain unease. Does everyone truly sleep, or do some lie awake, watching, listening? One lesser-known detail hints that bed sharing also served as a guard against assassination. In turbulent and dangerous courts, monarchs would surround themselves with loyal companions at night. The logic was simple and brutal. No attacker could reach the king without first stepping over living witnesses. Warmth, politics, and security, three powerful reasons, all stitched into the very same quilt. Yet you have to wonder how truly restful such a sleep could ever be. The royal bed, then, was so much more than furniture. It was a stage for alliances, a fortress against the cold, a nest of both profound trust and quiet suspicion. You tuck yourself deeper beneath the layers, feeling the imagined bodies close on either side of you. The chamber outside may be frozen solid, but here, pressed shoulder to shoulder, you sense a fragile, shared warmth. It is not private. It is not entirely comfortable. But in a medieval castle, during the longest and coldest of winters, this closeness was survival itself. The curtains close again, and with them comes the peculiar, living orchestra of the medieval night. At first you think it will be a profound silence, but the chamber quickly proves you wrong. Every sound seems to be magnified in the deep stillness. The wind, howling through the narrow arrow slits, the wood, popping and hissing in the hearth, the distant bells, tolling from a chapel tower. A monarch lying awake would have known these noises as constant companions, their rhythm as familiar and steady as the beating of their own heart. Contemporary observers often noted that the wind was the loudest voice in the castle. It wailed through unseen cracks, groaned along the high battlements, and rattled the heavy shutters. Imagine lying in the dark, listening to the powerful gusts rise and fall like a living, breathing thing circling the walls. Some likened it to the sound of spirits, or the voices of saints whispering warnings from beyond. Others simply cursed it for keeping them awake. Even today, historians cannot say with any certainty how much insulation the tapestries and shutters truly provided, only that people wrote about the noise as often as they wrote about the cold. And then came the footsteps. Guards patrolled the stone corridors throughout the night, their boots striking the stone in a steady, reassuring cadence. You can hear them now, echoes that start faint, grow closer, and then fade again into the distance. For a monarch, that rhythm could be either reassurance or a grim reminder. Reassurance that watchmen were guarding their life. A reminder that danger always lurked, requiring vigilance even at the stroke of midnight. Some rulers even insisted on extra patrols during the winter, when the deep snow muffled all approaches and made surprise attacks easier. Security, just like warmth, was never guaranteed. One eccentric note survives in reports of night watch songs. Certain guards were required to call out the hour and chant brief prayers as they patrolled. Imagine that strange mix. Deep, resonant voices breaking the silence with cries of "midnight" and "all is well," or verses of psalms drifting through the dark corridors and into the royal bedchamber. For some monarchs, these chants were comforting. For others, they were just another irritation in a night already filled with noise. Closer still, the castle's own creatures added their part to the chorus. Dogs growled softly from the great hall, keeping an uneasy watch. Owls screeched from the high rafters. In some records, even rats are mentioned, their tiny claws scurrying across the rush-covered floors, a sound clearly audible in the deep hush of the small hours. You pull your covers tighter at the thought, realizing that royal blood did not exempt anyone from sharing their space with pests. The bed curtains help to block the sight, but not always the sound. Debate continues among researchers about whether such a cacophony hindered or aided sleep. Some suggest that medieval people were simply more accustomed to noise, finding a strange comfort in the familiar sounds of a living building. Others argue that insomnia was common, worsened by the constant drafts and disturbances. Diaries and chronicles record both experiences. Some nights slept through heavily, others spent restless and watchful. Now, close your eyes and just listen. The room breathes with a layered, complex sound. The hiss of the wind, the creak of ancient timber beams, the sharp crack of cooling stone. A servant coughs faintly in an adjoining chamber. Somewhere, a heavy hinge squeals. It is not silence, but a rich collage of noises that remind you of the life teeming just beyond the bed curtains. A king or queen never slept alone, not truly. Even in the deepest stillness, the castle itself whispered and groaned, as if it too were alive, dreaming fitfully in the cold. You curl deeper beneath the quilts, seeking a final layer of comfort, but your mind drifts toward another, more intimate discomfort, cleanliness, or the stark lack of it. The royal bedchamber might look splendid with its gilded hangings and intricately carved posts, but when it came to hygiene, even kings and queens could not escape the grim realities of medieval life. There were linen sheets, yes, but they were washed far less often than you might hope. The priceless furs and heavy quilts rarely saw soap and water at all, for the harsh process of washing could ruin their delicate texture. Instead, a constant assault of perfumes, herbs, and scented powders was employed to mask the underlying odor, until a certain staleness became part of the room's very identity. Household accounts tell us that sheets were sometimes changed weekly in the wealthiest of courts, though in the harsher winters this frequency dropped dramatically. Laundering meant the back-breaking work of hauling water, breaking through ice on the wells, and attempting to dry the heavy, damp cloth by smoky, inefficient fires. It was simply too much trouble when snow piled high against the castle walls. A king could command armies, but he could not command the laws of nature. A peculiar practice surfaces in some records: sprigs of rosemary or lavender tucked directly into the bedding, intended to discourage lice and fleas. You can almost imagine lying down and brushing against the brittle skeletons of these herbs, crackling softly beneath the sheets. Their scent might soothe, or it might simply scratch, but their purpose was always brutally practical. Insects thrived in the insulated warmth of the layered bedding, and keeping them at bay was an endless, often futile struggle. The royal body, for all its divine authority, was just as appetizing to these tiny pests as any peasants. Scholars have long debated how much of a problem vermin truly were in royal households. Some argue that the constant laundering performed by armies of servants managed to keep infestations at bay. Others insist that even in the grandest castles, lice and bedbugs were simply unavoidable companions. A few even suggest that the heavy, almost obsessive use of herbs and perfumes noted in royal inventories is itself damning evidence of a losing battle against this crawling discomfort. One detail, almost comical in its brutal honesty, comes from surviving letters describing monarchs complaining of restless nights caused by sheets too dirty or bedding too damp. Imagine the ruler of half of Europe, a figure of immense power, scratching furiously at flea bites in the dark, muttering curses as the winter wind howled outside. Any sense of wealth in that moment must have felt hollow indeed. And then there was the ever-present matter of the chamber pots, stored discreetly near the bed or behind a decorative screen. They brought necessary relief without forcing one to leave the warm cocoon of the curtains. Yet their odour inevitably lingered, mingling with the greasy smoke of tallow candles and the damp scent of wool. Servants would empty them each morning, but throughout the long night, the smell hovered like an unwelcome, invisible guest. To our modern sensibilities, the thought is deeply unpleasant, but in a world without plumbing, it was a simple, unavoidable necessity. Consider, too, the floor coverings, rushes strewn with fragrant herbs, replaced only a few times a year. In winter, they trapped soot from the fire, spilled wine, and fallen food crumbs, offering both a layer of insulation and a thriving, hidden ecosystem for insects and rodents. The air of the royal chamber was never pristine. It was a thick blend of cold draughts and earthy, organic smells, softened only by the sweet incense burned at prayer times. You lie there now, imagining the scratch of linen that is not freshly laundered, the weight of furs carrying their own musky scent, the faint, dry crackle of rosemary under your hand. Sleep was possible, yes, but it always came with compromise. Cleanliness was relative, and comfort was never absolute. Kings and queens may have ruled vast realms by day, but when they closed their eyes at night, they surrendered to the very same irritations faced by all humanity: itching, odour, and the occasional, unseen scuttle of tiny legs in the dark. The oppressive weight of the bed, the lingering smell of smoke and herbs, they all begin to blur together as your thoughts wander backward, toward the evening meal that preceded this uneasy sleep. For in the world of royals, bedtime did not come on an empty stomach. Winter nights often followed grand, magnificent feasts held in the draughty halls below, where torches flickered and minstrels played as heavy wooden platters groaned under the sheer weight of roasted meats. Imagine trudging up the cold stone stairs afterward, your belly full of rich venison, boar, or even swan, all of it perhaps washed down with heavily spiced wine. You lie back in bed now and feel that profound fullness pressing against your ribs, a warm but heavy anchor in the cold room. Sleep, under such opulent conditions, was not always restful. Surviving inventories and detailed banquet accounts reveal the incredible richness of these meals. Medieval kings and queens dined heavily on roasted fowl, on bread served thick with butter, and on rich stews swimming in exotic spices imported at enormous cost. Even in the depths of winter, their tables dazzled with preserved fruits, candied nuts, and mulled wine, fragrant with cinnamon and cloves. What you ate before sleep inevitably shaped your dreams, and a monarch's dreams were often flavored by this nightly indulgence. A curious detail surface here. Court physicians of the era frequently advised against overeating at night, warning that it produced nightmares or disturbed the body's essential humors. Yet monarchs, ever human in their appetites, largely ignored such prudent counsel. After hours of feasting, they carried that very indulgence with them into the royal bed. Some chroniclers even hint that certain kings often complained of indigestion and troubling night sweats, ailments made infinitely worse by the heavy mountain of bedding piled upon them. Picture the sharp irony of it. Powerful rulers, laid low not by their enemies, but by their own supper. Modern scholars continue to puzzle over the precise role of food in shaping medieval sleep. Did the potent combination of heavy meats, rich wines, and cold, draughty chambers conspire to produce more restless nights than restful ones, or were royal bodies simply more accustomed to such rich fare? The evidence is thin, scattered among ancient medical treatises and faded diary notes, leaving us to imagine how a stomach churning with venison stew might mingle with the mournful howl of the wind to create strange, unsettling dreams. The drink, too, played its part. Spiced wine or strong ale was thought to warm the body against the winter chill. You can almost feel it now, a pleasant heat spreading through your chest, only to fade just as quickly as the cold presses back in. For a brief, blissful while, the alcohol would have dulled the discomfort, but it also blurred the delicate edge between waking and sleeping. Dreams took on vivid, sometimes bizarre, colours under its potent influence. There are whispers in the chronicles of monarchs, reporting powerful visions after their feasts, visions that were often interpreted as divine omens or grave warnings, though perhaps they were nothing more than the lingering echoes of too much drink. One eccentric practice at certain courts was the nightly consumption of possets, a thick, warm mixture of hot milk, ale and spices, taken just before bed. It was intended as a soporific, a gentle sleeping potion. Imagine sipping such a concoction in a frigid room, then sinking under the heavy quilts, feeling drowsy, but somehow unsettled. The sheer richness of the brew must have weighed heavily on the stomach, a sensation perhaps soothing, perhaps deeply troubling. You picture it now. The king, adjusting his fur-lined cap. The queen, sinking deeper into her pillows, both of them heavy with the weight of food and wine. Their chamber is not silent. Their bodies are not light. Beneath the heavy curtains, sleep comes slowly, thick and viscous as syrup. Outside, the castle moans with the force of the wind. Inside, their dreams begin to stir, shaped by the feasts that fill the belly but can never truly silence the cold. And so, you realize that royal nights were never entirely restful. Comfort was always layered with discomfort, warmth with an insidious draught, luxury with a deep unease, and fullness with indigestion. The banquet may have been splendid, but its price was often paid in a restless, fitful slumber, punctuated by the sound of turning bodies and muffled sighs in the dark. The night stretches on, and long before true sleep can take hold, ritual presses in. A monarch did not simply tumble into bed at the end of a long day. The very act of retiring was layered with a solemn ceremony, a performance shaped by a potent mixture of faith, fear, and formality. You can hear it now, the soft, reverent murmur of attendants reciting prayers as they gently help the king or queen out of their heavy public robes and into simple private linen. The harsh flicker of candles grows gentler, the sweet smoke of incense curls into the cold air, and the chamber itself seems to shift its purpose, transforming from a public space into a sacred one. The royal chaplain often played a central role at bedtime. Surviving records describe priests or personal confessors present in the chamber, offering quiet blessings just before the monarch closed their eyes. The words they spoke were not elaborate, but they were undeniably weighty. Pleas for divine protection against the many dangers of the night. For in the medieval mind, darkness was not merely an absence of light. It was a tangible realm, populated by demons, thieves, and the spectre of sudden illness. Lying down to sleep meant surrendering your conscious guard, yielding to forces far beyond your control. A whispered Paternoster, or Ave Maria, was a form of armour, every bit as vital as the heavy blankets and thick curtains. One particular detail, found in various household ordinances, is the requirement for candles to burn all night before sacred icons or crucifixes while the monarch slept. Imagine that faint golden glow falling across the faces of painted saints, their solemn eyes appearing to watch through the long hours of the night, a sight that was deeply comforting to some, and perhaps profoundly unsettling to others. You can almost feel their silent gaze in the darkness, a constant, humbling reminder that even kings and queens lay powerless beneath higher powers. An intriguing habit appears in some chronicles. Certain monarchs would trace the sign of the cross on their pillows before resting their heads. Others were known to sprinkle holy water on their bed curtains. These small gestures may sound quaint to us now, but in their minds, they offered genuine, tangible protection against sudden death, terrifying nightmares, or the influence of evil spirits. Scholars remain uncertain whether these rituals were universal obligations or simply the more personal quirks of individual piety. But the pattern is clear. Religion had seeped into the very fabric of sleep itself. There were practical elements to these rituals too. Prayers often included specific requests for earthly needs like health and fertility. A queen, anxious to bear an heir, might fall asleep repeating invocations to the saints associated with childbirth. A king, facing an impending war, might dream of a divine promise of victory after murmuring a martial psalm. The night was not just for rest. It was a crucial preparation for the heavy burdens of the day to come. One curious practice, recorded in France, involved reciting portions of the Book of Hours aloud, even while in bed, until a welcome drowsiness finally overtook the speaker. Imagine lying under a mountain of heavy quilts, lips moving softly, the sacred words of devotion blending with the gentle crackle of the hearth, until they drifted into the quiet murmurs of sleep. The very rhythm of prayer, in this way, became a lullaby. Researchers today continue to ask whether these nightly rituals genuinely calmed the monarchs, or if they simply reflected a culture steeped in pervasive fear. Were the prayers heartfelt expressions of a deep and abiding faith, or were they merely a duty, performed before the watchful eyes of attendants? We cannot know for certain. What is clear is that sleep for them was never an entirely private affair. Faith accompanied them into the bedchamber as surely as any fur or fire. Now, close your own eyes for a moment and picture it. The monarch lies back, their heads sinking into ornately embroidered pillows. A servant kneels quietly at the foot of the bed, reciting a final blessing. The heavy curtains sway as someone closes them tight, sealing in both the precious, fragile warmth and the power of whispered prayers. Outside, the wind moans its lonely song. But inside, the night has been consecrated with ritual. And so, sleep, when it finally comes, will not be just physical. It will be spiritual. A vulnerable state guarded by sacred words, murmured softly into the dark. The fire fades low. The prayers drift into silence. And yet the night remains profoundly restless. In these deep, quiet hours, the shadows themselves seem to shift with a quiet, watchful intention. You imagine lying beneath the heavy curtains, hearing the wind claw at the wooden shutters, and wondering if something unseen, something ancient, lurks in the deep darkness of the chamber. For monarchs of this age, superstition clung to every cold breath of night air. Winter was not only a season of cold, it was haunted. Chronicles from the period mention that many nobles harbored a deep fear of night spirits or demons who were believed to prowl the dark corridors of the world. Dreams, in particular, were considered to be vulnerable thresholds, porous gateways through which such malevolent beings might slip into a sleeper's soul. To sleep, then, was to lower one's guard, to become vulnerable, and so a host of personal defenses, charms, prayers, and sacred relics were kept close. A queen might tuck a cool saint's medal beneath her pillow, its metal a tangible reassurance against her skin. A king might sleep with a holy relic resting on his bedside table, its sacred presence a shield against the vast, formless unknown. These talismans were never mere trinkets. They were armor for the soul. There is a curious report of protective charms being sewn directly into the opulent bed curtains, stitched with hidden symbols meant to ward off evil. Imagine tracing the path of those secret threads in the heavy fabric as you drifted off, trusting in their silent power to hold the darkness at bay. Such practices beautifully blur the line between established faith and ancient folklore, between formal church ritual and the whispered superstitions of a long night. Historians remain divided over how widespread these deeply personal beliefs were among the elites, but subtle hints appear again and again in court accounts and private letters. One eccentric detail survives in tales of monarchs keeping protective animals near their chamber. Cats, for instance, with their unnerving, watchful eyes, were believed by some to be able to sense spirits and ward off misfortune. Whether these animals truly roamed the royal bedchamber is uncertain, but the notion lingers of these small, furry guardians standing sentry against things that moved unseen in the night. The loyal dogs, already serving as warm footrests, may also have doubled as sentinels against these more spectral fears. And the dreams. Oh, the dreams. The heavy feasts, the spiced wine, and the smoky air all combined to produce visions that were both vivid and strange. In this world, a nightmare was never just a nightmare. It could be a prophecy, a divine warning, or a demonic threat. You can picture the monarch waking suddenly, their heart racing, the chilling echo of some ghastly image still clinging to their mind. Attendants might rush to their side to soothe them, to offer a cup of holy water, to remind the ruler that evil could not breach the sanctity of the blessed curtains. Yet the fear remained a cold, more biting and personal than any physical frost. Debates continue among modern researchers about how literally medieval monarchs believed in these night terrors. Some argue that they were, at their core, deeply superstitious, clinging to their charms with a genuine, palpable dread. Others believe the rituals were more symbolic outward shows of conventional devotion, while inwardly, these rulers wrestled with anxieties rooted in the very real dangers of politics and responsibility. Perhaps both were true. Power, after all, invites paranoia, and the long, dark night gave those fears ample room to grow and fester. Now, imagine yourself lying there, trying to surrender to sleep, but instead listening intently for sounds beyond the curtain. Every creak in the old timber feels ominous. Every gust of wind against the stone becomes a sinister whisper. The castle itself seems alive, restless, and not entirely friendly. You clutch your covers tighter, not just against the physical cold now, but against the crushing weight of your own fear. For if you were a medieval monarch, you were not only the guardian of a realm, you were a single, vulnerable soul, adrift in a world where darkness held profound meaning, inherent danger, and deep, unsettling mystery. And so, night after night, kings and queens endured this potent blend of faith and fear, of tangible warmth and imagined chill, of solemn ritual and deep, primal unease. The cold was one enemy, a familiar and predictable foe, but the imagination was another, far more unpredictable. Wrapped in their furs, scented with protective herbs, and guarded by sacred relics, they tried to find a moment of peace. Sometimes they did, but sometimes the night remained a battlefield long after the last of the candles went dark. The long night does not pass in a single, unbroken stretch. You find yourself waking in the deep, profound dark, not once, but perhaps twice. For in the Middle Ages, sleep was rarely a continuous journey. People understood the night in two acts, speaking of a first sleep and a second sleep, with a quiet, contemplative interval in between a waking pause when dreams were recalled, quiet prayers were whispered, or simple, thoughtful tasks were done. You sit up now, the heavy curtains, a dark wall around you, and you can feel the strange, potent stillness of that midnight gap. Evidence from surviving medical treatises and court diaries shows that this segmented sleep was the absolute norm. In those icy, cavernous chambers, the first portion of slumber would last for a few hours, often broken when the fire in the hearth sank low and the insistent cold finally pressed its way in. Monarchs might wake in this interval to sip warm, spiced ale or mulled wine, to pray for their souls, or to simply sit in quiet, uninterrupted thought. After this interlude, they would return to bed for their second sleep, rising only at the first light of dawn. One fascinating glimpse into this world comes from a 15th century French physician who described this midnight interval as an ideal time for intimacy or deep reflection. For monarchs, it was often repurposed for quiet strategy. Imagine a king, half drowsy, but with his mind sharp, murmuring plans to his closest advisers who stood waiting patiently in the shadows. The royal bedchamber thus became both bedroom and council chamber, in those strange, liminal hours between sleeps. Curiously, some contemporary writers praised this rhythm as being healthier than our modern ideal of unbroken sleep, claiming it aligned perfectly with the body's natural humours. Others condemned it, warning that too much wakefulness at night invited a creeping melancholy or, worse, the attention of evil spirits. Even among the experts of the time, no single view prevailed. What is clear is that kings and queens experienced the same restless natural awakenings that the peasants did. They simply cloaked them in layers of elaborate ritual and meaning. During that wakeful pause, a monarch might also read, or have sacred scriptures read aloud to them by their attendants. You can almost hear the quiet, steady murmur of psalms drifting through the heavy curtains, the soft flicker of a single candle flame catching the gold leaf of a precious manuscript page. This unique blend of faith and fatigue shaped the atmosphere of the night, creating a sacred space where the body and the soul felt equally vulnerable. There are hints of stranger practices, too. In some courts, physicians recommended gently stretching one's limbs or pacing briefly around the chamber to aid digestion before returning to bed. Picture the odd, lonely sight of a queen, still in her heavy nightgown and fur-lined cap, walking slow, deliberate circles in her chamber, her servants trailing silently behind with lanterns, while the snow beat against the shutters. It is a scene both eerie and strangely relatable, for who among us has not wandered sleeplessly through our own homes at night? The return to bed was like crossing a threshold once more. The curtains would be drawn tight again, the coals in the brazier perhaps refreshed, a sacred relic touched for reassurance. The second sleep tended to be deeper, the dreams thicker and more vivid, lasting until the first faint grey light of dawn finally seeped through the cracks in the shutters. You lie back into that ancient rhythm now, understanding that rest in a medieval castle was not a linear journey, but a cyclical one. 2 steps forward into sleep, 1 pause for reflection, then 2 steps again into the deep. And so you realize that even kings and queens, wrapped in priceless silks and guarded by loyal soldiers, lived with the very same fragmented nights that touched every single villager in their land. Their immense power did not grant them the gift of unbroken sleep. It merely surrounded their waking hours with more elaborate ritual, with quiet counsel, and with the constant, hopeful whispers of faith. The profound stillness of this night pause leads your thoughts upward, beyond the heavy curtains and the cold stone, to the vast, silent sky itself. For medieval monarchs, sleep was not only shaped by warmth and ritual, but also by the distant, glittering stars. The science of astrology threaded through all their decisions, and the sacred hours of rest were no exception. Court astrologers would advise on precisely when to sleep, when to wake, and even which direction the great bed should face. You smile at the thought. Rulers who commanded vast armies and entire kingdoms still deferred to the silent alignment of the planets before daring to shut their eyes. Accounts from the royal courts of England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire mention astrologers preparing complex natal charts and recommending the most auspicious hours for repose. It sounds extravagant to our ears, yet it reflected a deep and unwavering belief that the celestial bodies directly influenced one's health, mood, and even the content of one's dreams. A king might delay retiring if the stars were deemed inauspicious, or he might be urged to rise at the crack of dawn when the planet Venus was favorable. Sleep itself became a delicate negotiation, not only with the cold and hunger, but with the very heavens. An unusual anecdote survives about Catherine de' Medici of France, who reportedly kept her astrologers close and often consulted them about her daily rhythms, including her rest. Did she truly believe her dreams were shaped by Jupiter's position in the sky? Or was it a form of psychological balm, a way of finding order and reassurance in turbulent, dangerous times? Scholars remain divided, uncertain whether rulers wholeheartedly trusted such counsel, or if they used it more as a sophisticated tool of control and mystique. One eccentric detail lies in the very placement of the beds. Some medical astrological texts advised orienting the head toward the east to align with the rising sun and the promise of renewal. Others suggested pointing it south for warmth, Imagine the quiet groaning of heavy oak as attendants dragged the massive royal bed across the rush-covered floors just to match an astrologer's chart. It may sound absurd now, but in that world, the cosmos was as real and present in the bedchamber as the fire in the hearth. The debate about dreams also entered this celestial realm. Astrologers claimed they could interpret royal visions by tying them to planetary movements. A nightmare after a heavy feast might be blamed not on simple indigestion, but on the dark, malevolent influence of Saturn. A pleasant dream of sunlit fields and bountiful harvests could be praised as the gentle work of a benevolent Venus. Sleep itself became a stage for a grand celestial theatre, with the monarchs as both the audience and the principal actors. And yet, for all the grandeur of such cosmic ideas, the reality remained stubbornly human. You can picture the queen shifting uncomfortably, no matter what the stars advised, tugging her furs closer because a cold draught through the shutter paid no mind to the constellations. Still, the belief itself brought comfort. To think that one's night was written in the heavens was to impose a divine order upon the frightening chaos of cold and dark. Modern historians continue to wrestle with this fascinating interplay of early science, deep-seated superstition, and solemn ritual. Was it true conviction, or was it simply theatre, designed to impress courtiers and remind them that even a monarch's sleep was cosmic in its scope? Perhaps it was both. In a world where the harsh winter could strip power bare, belief in the stars wrapped kings and queens in another kind of protective blanket. You lie back now, imagining the vast night sky, glittering unseen beyond the thick castle walls. Inside the curtains, the monarch dreams beneath quilts of fur and silk. Outside, the heavens turn, indifferent, yet deeply significant to those who believed their very destinies were stitched among the constellations. The stars may not warm you, but they watch you, silently guiding the rhythm of every single breath you take until the dawn. The candles have burned low. The embers in the brazier barely glow, and yet the chamber itself seems to carry its own internal frost. You shift beneath the heavy covers, a small movement that disturbs the air, and you notice it, the sight of your own breath, rising before you in a pale, ghostly mist. Imagine being a monarch, encased in layers of velvet and priceless fur, yet waking in the deep of night, to see a soft puff of vapor drift before your face, like smoke escaping from your very lungs. The cold has finally breached the fortress of your curtains, and in that moment, you realize that any warmth here is always fragile, always temporary. Contemporary accounts describe frost forming inside royal chambers during the most severe winters. Servants recorded mornings when the heavy bed curtains had stiffened with rime, or when the water left in basins had frozen solid overnight. In the year 1407, a chronicler of the French court noted with genuine astonishment that a thin layer of ice had formed on the king's own coverlet while he slept. Such stark details remind us that the struggle against winter was not metaphorical. It was a physical, relentless, and utterly inescapable reality. One odd little note emerges from personal letters of the time. Courtiers sometimes joked about writing their names in the frost on the inside of the glass, or even on the ornate bedposts. Picture a half-frozen noble, tracing idle, swirling patterns at dawn while waiting for the fires to be stoked. Even amidst the profound discomfort, people found small, human ways to make light of their misery. Specialists still disagree on how common these extreme conditions truly were across all castles. Some insist they occurred only in especially harsh winters or in particularly exposed fortresses. Others argue they were a routine misery in the great stone keeps of northern Europe. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. A cold severe enough to wake monarchs in the dead of night, yet not an ordeal they faced every single night. What is certain, however, is that seeing your own breath and feeling the chill of frost on your pillow was no rare shock for these rulers. The sensation itself must have been startling. You lift the heavy quilt just to check, and the frigid air strikes your skin like 1,000 tiny knives. A queen might bury her face deeper into her furs, muttering curses about the insidious draughts. A king might call out sharply for his attendants to stoke the fires or bring yet more blankets. Imagine their deep, impotent frustration, sovereigns of entire kingdoms yet utterly unable to command the very air in their own bedchamber. There are stories of monarchs rising from bed to find their ink frozen solid in the inkwells, or the bread on their table crusted with ice. Such anecdotes emphasize the sheer, stubborn power of the cold. The castle was a mighty fortress, yes, but it was built to withstand armies of men, not the silent siege of weather. Winter infiltrated it as surely as breath fills the lungs. And you, lying beneath the curtains, feel that same profound vulnerability. Each exhale fogs before your eyes, undeniable proof that the small warmth of your own body is no match for the vast, indifferent chill pressing in from all sides. The bedding is heavy, the cap is tight on your head, the socks are thick on your feet, but none of it can erase the chilling reminder that you sleep inside a great stone shell, a place fundamentally open to the sky's icy will. In that moment, sleep itself becomes fragile. How do you drift away when the very air you breathe feels hostile? Perhaps you pull the sleeping dog closer at your feet, grateful for its simple, living heat. Perhaps you begin to pray again, half dreaming, hoping that the dawn will come sooner. Or perhaps you simply endure, teeth clenched, waiting for a merciful drowsiness to finally smother the discomfort. The monarchs were no different. They woke, they shivered, they complained, and they endured. So you close your eyes, the frost sparkling faintly on the very edge of the curtains, your breath rising like silent smoke signals in the dark. You realize that for kings and queens, these winter nights were not defined by their power or their wealth, but by their resilience. They slept, yes, but always with the stark, chilling reminder that even the most powerful rulers could not escape the breath of winter, curling silently inside their most private sanctuary. The frost lingers in the air, a constant presence, but imagine now that the monarch is not in their usual chamber at all. Castles, after all, were not always permanent residences. Kings and queens travelled constantly, dragging their enormous households across muddy roads and frozen fields. And with them came one of the strangest and most telling luxuries of power, a travelling bed. Royal itineraries from the period reveal that these beds were treated almost like portable thrones, symbols of ultimate authority as well as vital instruments of survival. When a ruler journeyed between their various fortresses, monasteries, or manors, a team of carpenters would carefully dismantle the great bed frame, pack its carved panels and posts, and haul it by cart to the next destination. The precious curtains, quilts, and pillows were bundled carefully into massive trunks. And wherever the monarch stopped for the night, the servants would reassemble the bed as if they were erecting a small portable palace. Imagine the immense relief of stepping into a new, drafty, and unfamiliar hall, only to find the same familiar canopy waiting like a beloved fragment of home transplanted onto foreign stone. One curious detail, preserved in ancient household ordinances, describes this process in almost ceremonial language. The king's bed was to be erected first in any new residence, before the kitchens were even arranged or the councils convened. Comfort, or at least the semblance of comforting continuity, mattered as much as governance itself. Even powerful monarchs dreaded the bone-jarring shock of a cold, unfamiliar mattress. Researchers continue to discuss whether these magnificent travelling beds were truly practical for providing warmth, or if their function was largely symbolic. Some argue that the familiarity itself was a deep comfort, that sleeping within the same trusted structure helped to reduce the inherent anxiety of their endless journeys. Others suggest the true benefit lay in ensuring a measure of privacy, since the bed's own curtains provided a known, secure cocoon, even in the strangest of halls. Whatever the case, the sheer spectacle of servants reassembling a royal bed, wherever the ruler paused, highlights the strange and fascinating mixture of fragility and grandeur that lay at the very heart of kingship. One eccentric story tells of England's Henry VIII insisting that his portable bed accompany him even on his hunting expeditions, so that in a rustic, rough-hewn lodge, he could still rest beneath his own embroidered hangings. Picture the stunning absurdity of such excess. Muddy boots, barking hounds, rough wooden walls, and then, standing proudly in the corner, a towering four-poster, glowing with crimson curtains. A monarch's sleep, no matter how impractical the logistics, could not be left to chance. And yet the cold followed them everywhere. Whether they were in Windsor, Rouen, or a quiet abbey guest house, the winter crept through the shutters just the same. The familiar curtains helped. The layered quilts helped. But the frost still gathered on the glass, and their breath still hung in the air. Comfort, it turned out, was portable, but only partially so. The body still shivered, no matter how carefully the bed was rebuilt. You picture yourself now, trudging along with this great royal procession, watching as servants unload heavy timber and rich fabric, assembling the same heavy structure again and again and again. The task is exhausting, yet absolutely vital. For at night, when the monarch lies down, the comforting continuity of the bed tells them, "You are still sovereign, even in exile, even in the heart of winter." And so the travelling bed becomes far more than just furniture. It is a moving fortress against the night, a symbol of identity dragged across entire kingdoms. Inside it, kings and queens curled up like anyone else, whispering prayers, tugging their furs closer, and watching the frost form at the edges. Outside, the world might change with every passing mile. But inside, at least for a few precious hours, they could pretend they slept in permanence. You imagine the great bed being reassembled once more, a familiar ritual in an unfamiliar place. But now, your thoughts drift beyond the cold chamber walls, out into the frozen darkness, to the peasants who huddle in their huts outside. For all their own suffering, kings and queens endured the cold with a degree of comfort unimaginable to the villagers who served them. This comparison sharpens the perspective. While the monarch lay beneath veritable mountains of fur, the common folk faced the night differently. Peasants often slept on thin, scratchy straw pallets, scattered near a central hearth, their bodies packed tightly together like firewood in a desperate tangle of limbs seeking shared warmth. Contemporary records and faded illustrations reveal that common folk huddled as entire families, sometimes even with their precious livestock sharing the same small space for its vital heat. The steamy, animal warmth from a cow or a sheep in the corner of a hut often gave off more consistent heat than any meagre hearth. Meanwhile, back in the castle, the ruler might complain of a single draught that slipped past layers of priceless squirrel fur. The irony is stark and biting. Royalty, surrounded by every conceivable symbol of wealth, yet never fully shielded from the elements. Peasants in their low-roofed huts, warmed by their own communal closeness, surviving in ways the elite might never have to admit. A curious anecdote arises from old manorial roles. Some villagers would rotate their places by the fire throughout the night, taking turns to lie closest to the glowing embers. Imagine the slow, quiet shuffle of bodies in the dark, the whispered, earnest negotiations over who most deserved the warm spot. You must contrast that with a monarch, alone in their grandeur, drawing heavy curtains around their own private, portable furnace of bedding. Both struggled with the very same cold, though one cloaked the fight in rich velvet and the other in smoke and sweat. Researchers still debate whether the royals were truly more comfortable than the peasants during the harshest of winters. Yes, the monarch had innumerable layers of bedding and a host of servants to tend their fires, but the sheer, cavernous size of their chambers and the unforgiving nature of the stone walls made them vastly harder to heat than the small, low-roofed cottages of the poor. Some historians suggest that peasants, despite their poverty, were often warmer in their compact huts than kings were in their drafty great halls. Comfort, it seems, was not a currency guaranteed by gold. One eccentric practice among villagers was to sleep in shifts, with half the family resting while the others kept the fire alive. That cooperative, essential rhythm stands in sharp contrast to the monarch's utter reliance on their attendants. The king might ring a bell for servants to bring fresh coals, while the peasants simply rose to feed the fire themselves. Both of their nights were punctuated by the demands of survival, but one endured it as a public performance of endurance, the other within the simple, unspoken bonds of family. Now, picture it from the monarch's perspective. Perhaps he lay awake at night, listening to the storm rage outside, wondering vaguely how his subjects fared in their humble huts. Did a flicker of empathy stir within him? Or did such thoughts never manage to intrude upon the royal cocoon? The chronicles are silent on this matter, but the imagination lingers. And you, lying here, sense the difference most keenly. Power bought layers, but it did not buy immunity. In the end, the cold leveled everyone. So when kings and queens sighed about their icy pillows and the frost on their curtains, their discomfort was real, but it was always relative. Outside, peasants lay shivering, sometimes too poor for even a single quilt, sometimes relying on the small bodies of their children for heat. Inside, monarchs cursed the single draught that crept past their velvet hangings. Both endured nights that felt endless. Both rose stiff and aching at dawn. The cold, impartial as ever, spared no one. It only disguised itself differently. A scratchy straw pallet for the villager, a silken quilt for the monarch. In the end, winter turned every sleeper into the same creature, huddled, anxious, and waiting for a warmth that would not come until the sun finally rose. The deep hush of the bedchamber hides another presence, the steady, rhythmic vigilance of the night guards. Even as kings and queens attempted to find their rest, men clad in mail and leather patrolled the halls, their breath fogging in the frigid air as they paced the cold, lonely corridors. You can almost hear it now, the soft rasp of mail, the muffled, rhythmic thud of boots on stone, the low murmur exchanged between two watchmen as they crossed paths in the gloom. Sleep, in a medieval castle, was never entirely private. It was framed by the constant, living sound of protection. Administrative records from the English and Burgundian courts make it clear that guards were assigned in rotating shifts throughout the night, especially in winter, when the darkness lingered for so long. Their duty was not only to keep assassins and thieves at bay, but also to tend the hallway fires, to check the shutters, and to ensure that no accidents threatened the sleeping sovereign. Imagine the strange relief of a queen, listening to those distant footsteps, knowing that someone was circling the castle walls, while she drowsed safely behind her curtains. Yet, there is an odd twist. Some chronicles tell of guards who were required to call out the hour as they made their rounds. All is well, they would cry into the night, their voices echoing through the long passageways. It was meant to reassure, but one wonders if the sudden interruptions ever irritated a monarch trying to stay asleep beneath their heavy quilts. Still, the sound of vigilance was surely better than a deep silence, which might suggest negligence or, far worse, danger. Specialists continue to disagree about how close these guards actually came to the royal chamber itself. Some argue that watchmen stood just outside the door, their spears held ready in hand to ensure that no intruder slipped past. Others maintain that the guards kept their distance so as not to disturb the sanctity of the monarch's rest. The truth probably varied depending on the ruler's own temperament. A paranoid king might demand men at his very bedside, while a more relaxed one might be content to send them to patrol the outer halls. One curious anecdote survives of guards warming themselves with mulled ale during their long, cold shifts, their quiet voices growing louder as the drink dulled the misery of the cold. Picture their faint laughter drifting upward, disturbing the solemn hush of a castle at night. Perhaps a king stirred in his bed, annoyed. Or perhaps he was amused. After all, even loyal soldiers needed some small comfort in the endless winter darkness. Animals, too, played their part in this nightly security. Great hounds would lie in the doorways, serving as both a living alarm and a powerful deterrent. Their low growls or sudden, sharp barks would punctuate the night, startling sleepers, but also reassuring them that nothing passed unnoticed. You can hear it now, the deep, booming bark of a mastiff echoing in the courtyard, followed by a silence that seems even sharper for the interruption. This security was not foolproof, of course. Tales still exist of assassins scaling the high walls, or of conspirators sneaking into bedchambers despite the guards. One French king famously ordered additional locks to be placed on his bed curtains, so fearful was he that even his own personal attendants might betray him. The image is a striking one, a monarch, cloaked in furs, personally fastening heavy cords across the velvet as if hiding from his own household. Fear, much like the cold, was an intruder that could slip beneath any door. Now you return to your imagined bed. The muffled noises of the guards filter through boots scraping on stone, a distant bark, a shouted hour. These sounds mingle with the sigh of the wind and the creak of old wood, weaving a complex tapestry of vigilance and deep unease. Royalty may have rested their heads on ornately embroidered pillows, but their sleep was never solitary. It was watched, guarded, and surrounded by the footsteps of others, pacing the long, cold night away. The footsteps fade, and in the hush that follows, sleep presses in again. But soon, the dreams take over. For medieval monarchs, dreams were not idle fantasies. They were treated as vital messages, as divine warnings, or as fleeting glimpses of destiny itself. You can imagine a king waking with a sudden start, sweat dampening his fur-lined nightcap, utterly convinced that the flickering, ephemeral images of his sleep held profound meaning for his entire realm. Accounts from chronicles and private letters show how gravely these rulers regarded their dreams. Some were important enough to be recorded by scribes the very next morning, preserved in the court annals alongside records of battles and treaties. A dream could be interpreted as a sign of divine favor, or as a dark portent of impending doom. Kings and queens did not simply dismiss their midnight visions, they treated them like urgent dispatches from heaven itself. One curious record tells of Henry I of England, who reportedly dreamed of his ship sinking shortly before the infamous White Ship disaster tragically claimed the life of his only heir. Was it a coincidence? Or was it a prophecy? We cannot know. But to his contemporaries, it seemed a chilling confirmation that the night could whisper truths that were often ignored in the bright light of day. The interpretation of these powerful visions often fell to court astrologers or personal confessors. They would pore over the symbols, linking a dream of wolves to a coming rebellion, or a vision of sunlit fields to fertility and peace. Even simple nightmares stirred intense scrutiny. Imagine a queen describing a shadowy figure from her sleep, only to be told that it signaled a coming betrayal from within her own household. Trust, already so fragile in the treacherous courts of intrigue, could be shattered by a single restless night. Researchers still debate how much influence these dreams truly had on actual political decisions. Some suggest they were often used as convenient rhetorical tools, with rulers citing supposed visions to justify choices they had already made. Others believe that, steeped in the deep piety of the age, monarchs genuinely saw their dreams as a form of divine guidance. Either way, the ephemeral images of the night often bled into the concrete strategies of the day. There were lighter sides to this as well. One eccentric account mentions a noble gently teasing his king for dreaming of geese, interpreting it as nothing more than a case of indigestion from the evening supper. Humor, too, had its place in these conversations, reminding us that even the most solemn beliefs could sometimes bend under the gentle weight of laughter. But for the monarch, lying awake after such a powerful dream, the feeling must have been deeply uneasy. Picture the profound silence of the chamber, the faint whistle of a draught through the shutters, and the racing heart of a ruler who was utterly convinced that heaven itself had just spoken to him. Any sleep that followed would be shallow, fragmented, and haunted by the lingering echo of visions too vivid to simply ignore. You lie there with them now, the heavy bedding pressing on your chest, the faint glow of a single candle revealing the edges of the curtains. Your own mind replays the fragments of a dream, a ship on a stormy sea, a shadow at the door, a voice calling your name. Do they mean anything, or are they just the residue of wine and venison? You cannot decide. But in the medieval world, meaning was unavoidable. Every dream was a potential prophecy, and every night offered another chance for destiny to murmur in your ear. The lingering weight of dreams remains, but the relentless cold demands practical remedies. You imagine an attendant approaching the bed with a small wooden tray, setting it discreetly on a table nearby. On it rests a steaming goblet, a carefully prepared herbal draught designed to soothe both body and mind. Monarchs did not rely only on the physical layers of their bedding. They often turned to potions and concoctions to coax sleep through the long, unforgiving winter nights. Records from royal apothecaries and household accounts mention honeyed drinks mixed with poppy seeds, chamomile, or valerian root. These ancient herbs were believed to calm the nerves, ease digestion, and gently encourage drowsiness. You lift the cup in your imagination and take a slow sip. The liquid is warm, thick with honey, and faintly bitter with the taste of the earth. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, the bitterness in your throat. Sleep feels closer now, if not entirely certain. One eccentric detail emerges. Some of these mixtures included precious saffron, prized not only for its vibrant color and delicate flavor, but also for its supposed power to cheer the heart. Picture a monarch clutching a golden-hued potion, believing with all their being that it would push away the creeping melancholy as well as the cold. It was both medicine and luxury, captured in a single cup. Specialists today remain divided about the true effectiveness of these remedies. Some argue that they did indeed contain mild sedative properties. Others suggest their power was more psychological than chemical, a comforting placebo effect. Either way, the ritual itself mattered profoundly. To drink a carefully prepared potion before bed was to feel attended to, protected, and hopeful that sleep would arrive without a struggle. But not all remedies were so gentle. Physicians of the era sometimes prescribed stronger solutions: wine, fortified with opiates, or powerful spiced concoctions laced with narcotics. Imagine the uneasy, terrifying balance between relief and danger. The monarch, slipping into a heavy, unnatural slumber, while their attendants prayed fervently that it was restorative and not fatal. The blurred, treacherous line between a cure and a poison haunted all of medieval medicine. There were also remedies that were burned, not sipped. Certain fragrant herbs were tossed onto the hot coals of a brazier so that their smoke might purify the air. You can almost catch the sharp, cleansing scent of sage or rosemary filling the space within the curtains, the thick smoke curling into your nostrils until your eyes sting faintly. Was it truly healing, or was it just another layer of discomfort to be endured? Even now, scholars debate whether such fumigations had any genuine therapeutic effect, or if they served mostly as ritualistic gestures against unseen evils. And then, of course, there were the simple comfort foods: a cup of warm ale mixed with milk, or a thick, savoury broth carried to the bedside. The warmth filled the stomach, dulling the sharp pangs of hunger in a winter when meals could be irregular. Monarchs, just like their subjects, knew the ancient truth that a full, warm belly often coaxed a better sleep. You place the goblet down now and lie back, the warmth spreading through your chest, the bitterness of the herbs settling in your stomach. You can sense the potent blend of faith, early science, and desperate hope that surrounded these nightly remedies. Nothing could guarantee a peaceful sleep in a frozen castle, but each sip and sniff of herbs was a silent promise that someone at least had tried. The monarchs who commanded vast armies still had to rely on these fragile comforts: cups of honeyed herbs, precious pouches of saffron, or the sacred smoke of rosemary curling through the night. You close your eyes with them now, the ever-present draught softening your breath, the cold still pressing at the edges, but sleep now feels just a little closer. You stir from a light drowsiness, and for a disorienting moment, it feels as if the cold itself has crept beneath the curtains with you. Then you realize it is not your imagination. Snow has found its way inside. In the very harshest of winters, even the mighty castle walls could not fully hold back the weather. Servants recorded mornings when thin, powdery drifts had collected on the interior window ledges, or when fine flakes had blown through the cracks in the shutters and arrow slits, dusting the cold stone floor with a delicate layer of white. Imagine waking to see frost sparkling on your own quilt, a sight both delicate and merciless. Surviving letters and chronicles describe such scenes without a hint of exaggeration. A courtier in Scotland once wrote of finding a dusting of snow on the bed curtains themselves, shaken loose from the canopy when the wind howled its strongest. If the kings and queens were startled by this, so too were their attendants, who would have hurried to sweep away the icy trespass before it could melt into a dangerous dampness. An unusual custom emerges in these accounts. Some chambers were fitted with extra wooden boards, pressed tightly against the shutters in deep winter, almost like makeshift barricades against the raging storm. Yet the wind was a crafty, insidious thing. It forced the flakes through the tiniest of seams, swirling them into the chamber, as if to remind all royalty of nature's ultimate dominion. Imagine lying half asleep, only to feel a single cold flake land upon your cheek. The shock of it would steal your breath more sharply than any nightmare. Researchers remain uncertain how common this infiltration of the elements truly was. Some argue it only plagued the northernmost castles. Others suggest that in particularly brutal seasons, even the southern courts of France and England experienced it. The lack of consistent records leaves the question open, but the anecdotes that do survive paint vivid pictures of powerful monarchs, humbled by a simple dusting of snow beneath their own roofs. One eccentric story from German sources tells of servants rushing to light extra torches and braziers when snow had actually piled up inside a great hall, creating miniature drifts that had to be shoveled out like a common courtyard. You can almost hear their nervous laughter mixed with sheer exasperation, as if the castle itself had finally joined the storm. For the monarch, huddled under the covers, however, it would have been no laughing matter. The dampness that inevitably followed was far worse than the flakes themselves. Wet quilts could chill the body faster than dry cold, and illness lurked in every single shiver. Servants would have scrambled to replace the soiled bedding, dragging the heavy, damp furs toward the fire to dry, while the ruler tried desperately to cling to any remaining scraps of warmth. Picture yourself now, tucked deep inside the bed, hearing the violent rattle of the shutters as a blizzard roars outside. The curtains sway slightly with each powerful gust, and then you feel a faint tickle on your hand. A single snowflake has slipped inside, melting instantly on your skin. You pull the covers tighter, but the reminder is sharp and undeniable. No curtain, no wall, no bed can ever keep the winter fully at bay. And so the monarch endured. They pulled their furs close, called for more blankets, and perhaps muttered a desperate prayer that the dawn would come swiftly. In those moments, stripped of all ceremony and pomp, they were as vulnerable as any peasant in a hut. Just another human, startled awake by snow, drifting silently into their supposed fortress. The snow has been swept away, the curtains secured once more. And yet, the bed is not only a place of sleep. You realize now that for monarchs, it was also a stage for intimacy, an intimacy that was sometimes tender and sometimes purely strategic. Beneath the grand canopy, heirs were conceived, political alliances were sealed, and private affections were shared. The simple warmth of another body was often as powerful a defense against the cold as any fur. Surviving records from royal households reveal that kings and queens did not always sleep apart, as the customs of later centuries might suggest. In fact, their shared bed was often a very visible and public sign of their unity, both personal and political. When the Queen joined the King under the royal quilts, the entire court understood its profound significance. Heirs might be in the making, or a reconciliation after a public dispute might be underway. The simple act of sharing a bed extended far beyond private comfort. It was watched, it was whispered about, and it was meticulously recorded. One intriguing anecdote comes from the court of France, where keen-eyed observers carefully noted which nights the royal couple retired together and which nights they did not. Such intimate details were considered matters of state importance. Imagine attendants carefully marking down the monarch's private movements as if they were tracking the maneuvers of a war. The bed was both the cradle of a lineage and the ledger of a royal duty. But this intimacy was not always marital. Royal favourites, mistresses, or close companions sometimes occupied the royal bed. Oddly enough, this practice could be more political than it was romantic. Sharing the warmth of the royal bed was a high privilege, a clear signal of favour, and often a powerful tool of influence. A noble who spent the night near the king might find themselves in a much stronger political position come the morning. Scholars continue to debate whether these arrangements were as frequent as the chronicles suggest, or whether court gossip simply exaggerated them. Either way, the bed remained a potent space where politics and flesh were deeply entwined. There are lighter, more human details, too. Surviving letters hint at monarchs grumbling about their partner's cold feet, nudging them closer for warmth, or playfully stealing the better share of the blankets. Imagine Henry VII pulling the heavy furs greedily toward himself, or a queen laughing softly as she warmed her icy hands against her husband's side. For all the grandeur of their titles, in these quiet, private moments, they were simply people, craving the fundamental comforts of warmth and closeness. Of course, there were always risks. Intimacy could spark a scandal, fuel dangerous rumours, or stir up jealous rivalries within the court. The royal bed was never an entirely private space. Servants prepared it, guards stood watch nearby, and attendants often remained in adjoining rooms. Even the most passionate moments were threaded with an element of performance. A monarch might whisper sweet words in the dark, knowing full well that others would guess, or at least gossip, about them by the morning. One eccentric practice, recorded in Spain, involved royal couples drinking spiced wine together just before bed, a ritual believed to kindle both warmth and fertility. Whether it worked or not, the ritual itself created a sense of intimacy, blending comfort with deep-seated expectation. You can picture the goblets, gleaming in the firelight, the liquid thick with cinnamon, just before the curtains were finally drawn. Now, as you lie here beneath the imagined furs, you can sense the deep paradox of this space. The bed was intensely private, yet profoundly public. It was intimate, yet deeply political. It was a place where love might bloom, or where powerful alliances could be sealed. But it was always set against the stark backdrop of cold stone walls and the ever-watchful presence of attendants. For kings and queens, even the warmth found in another's arms carried a weight that went far beyond the personal. It was, in its own way, history being written under the quilts. The warmth of closeness fades, and another, harsher reality of the winter nights presses in: illness. For the monarchs of this age, the cold chamber was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Imagine waking in the deep, suffocating dark, your breath wheezing, your chest heavy, the damp chill clinging to your very lungs. In an age without antibiotics, a simple cough could easily spiral into a raging fever, and that fever could quickly turn to tragedy. Household physicians of the time often blamed bad airs that were believed to seep into the body during sleep. Their writings are filled with warnings against drafts creeping through the shutters, or the dangerous dampness that could settle deep within the bedding. Monarchs were advised to always keep their heads covered, to drink warming tonics, and to avoid sleeping too near the great stone walls, which were often heavy with frost. Yet, even with such meticulous care, the historical records overflow with accounts of colds, chills, and debilitating winter fevers being endured in the royal chambers. One striking example is Henry VIII of England, who was notorious for keeping his fires stoked impossibly high, so fearful was he of the ailments that the cold might provoke. His paranoia reflected a harsh lived experience. His court, like many others, was frequently plagued by deadly outbreaks of influenza and pneumonia during the long, dark winters. A monarch might be able to rule armies, but he could not rule his own lungs. An eccentric detail emerges from the medical accounts of the time. Leeches or heated cupping glasses were sometimes used at night, applied even while the patient was in bed, in an attempt to draw out the bad humours believed to cause the illness. Imagine the profound discomfort of lying beneath a mountain of heavy quilts, weak with fever, while attendants fussed with bloodletting bowls and pungent herbs, all meant to rebalance the body. Sleep, in such circumstances, must have been a restless, tangled affair, caught between the ravages of the illness and the rigours of its treatment. Scholars continue to argue whether the cold itself directly caused these ailments, or if the crowded, smoky chambers simply made them worse. Some suggest that the damp air was the true culprit. Others insist that the poor standards of hygiene made widespread infection inevitable. Whatever the ultimate cause, monarchs faced long nights punctuated by hacking, coughing fits, splitting headaches, and drenching sweats that left the fine linen sheets cold and clammy. The very sounds of illness would have carried through the chamber. You can almost hear it now, a harsh, hacking cough echoing off the cold stone, the soft rustle of attendants fetching water, the sharp crack of fresh logs being thrown hastily onto the fire. For the courtiers sleeping nearby, the sound was a grim, sobering reminder. Even the sovereign was mortal, vulnerable to the very same chills that stalked their humblest subjects. One curious remedy prescribed to sleepless, ailing monarchs was a cup of heated wine mixed with cloves and pepper. The fiery drink burned the throat, but it was thought to chase away the cold from the inside. Another remedy was far less pleasant: poultices of hot mustard or onion spread directly upon the chest. Imagine the sharp, burning sting of such concoctions against pale royal skin, endured in the desperate hope of just one more night's peaceful rest. You lie beneath the imagined furs and feel how deeply fragile the royal body truly was. Despite their crowns and their armies, the winter pressed in mercilessly, breeding sickness that no amount of wealth could fully ward off. Monarchs endured just as their people did, shivering, sweating, and coughing into the dark, waiting for the dawn. Their only real advantage lay in the constant attendance of others, hovering with their strange remedies, not in any form of true immunity. And so, When you think of royal sleep, do not picture serene, sleeping faces in golden, silent chambers. Instead, picture a rest constantly interrupted by coughing, bedding damp with fever, and servants whispering desperate prayers over a sovereign who, in that moment, looked no stronger than any villager's sick child. The cold was a form of democracy at its very harshest, reminding every single sleeper that kings and queens too could be undone by a single winter's night. The sound of coughing finally quiets, but the cold continues its slow, relentless siege, pressing not just against the body, but against the very structure of the castle itself. You look around the vast chamber and notice how the architecture itself seems to strain, how it must be forced to adapt. These mighty walls were built for defense, not for comfort, and every winter forced the nobles to improvise, to find desperate ways of softening the unyielding stone into something livable. The first and most obvious answer was the tapestry. Great, heavy swathes of wool and silk were hung to cover walls that would otherwise be bare, cold, and weeping with condensation. Contemporary inventories from royal households list dozens, sometimes hundreds, of these hangings, which were rotated with the seasons. In winter, the heaviest sets were brought out, their threads woven thick and dense to block the most determined drafts. Step close in your imagination and run your hand across one. You can feel its scratchy, honest warmth, the fibers dense enough to not only insulate but to muffle the harsh, echoing sounds of the stone chamber. They told grand stories of saints, of epic hunts, or of famous battles, but their real, unsung triumph was simple insulation. One unusual tactic, described in various accounts, was the practice of hanging tapestries not only on the walls, but also across the doorways, creating heavy, makeshift barriers against the cold air that flowed through the corridors. You can picture the Queen's chamber, with heavy, painted cloth draped from lintel to floor, turning the grand corridors into a series of muffled, darkened tunnels. The effect was undeniably cozy, yes, but it must also have been claustrophobic, as though the castle itself had physically shrunk in on itself in a defensive response to winter's bite. Scholars remain divided on how effective these measures truly were. Some believe that the combination of thick tapestries, plush carpets, and deep layers of rushes on the floor could genuinely raise the room's temperature by several crucial degrees. Others argue that they merely dulled the sharp edge of the drafts, leaving the room still frigid, but perhaps slightly less unbearable. Either way, monarchs spent absolute fortunes on magnificent fabrics that beautifully blurred the line between high art and practical insulation. Oddly enough, even the furniture itself was conscripted into this nightly battle. Beds, chairs, and benches were often draped with their own heavy covers in winter, creating yet more layers of warmth. In some of the most extreme cases, special bed tents were erected inside the bedchambers, essentially creating fabric rooms inside the stone rooms. Imagine the king, a figure of immense power, retreating each night into a smaller, more defensible fortress of cloth, hiding from the vast, cold hall that surrounded him. There are eccentric notes, too. In certain castles, the window openings themselves were stuffed with raw wool or dried reeds in the depths of winter. It was a crude, desperate form of insulation that would have left the rooms dim and gloomy, but also blessedly less drafty. Servants would have jammed the material into every crack, then draped the wooden shutters with cured animal skins. The look must have been shabby and rough compared to the gilded banners and painted walls, but in the heart of winter, survival always outweighed elegance. The floor coverings also mattered immensely. Rushes, scattered across the stone, trapped a layer of air and heat, while the magnificent carpets imported from the distant east became prized, almost sacred, possessions. Imagine stepping down from the high bed, your feet clad in thick woolen socks, onto a soft layer of woven wool instead of the shocking bare stone. It was a small luxury that could mean the difference between a sharp, painful gasp and a tolerable start to the day. Yet for all these clever adaptations, the cold almost always claimed victory in the end. The morning frost still crept across the glass, and the breath of sleepers still puffed in the air. The architecture resisted only so much. The rest was simply endured. You realize now that even kings and queens, surrounded by every imaginable luxury, lived in houses that constantly, loudly reminded them of the power of the elements. The castle was a fortress against men, it is true, but it was never a fortress against the weather. And so, you settle back into the imagined bed, listening to the heavy fabric of the curtains sway, feeling the ever-present draught, now dulled but not defeated. The walls hold firm against invading armies, but the cold still slides through them like an invisible, undefeated and eternal enemy. The walls and the curtains hold the frost at bay as best they can, but the chamber is now far from silent. You begin to notice the rich soundscape of a royal night, a strange and complex mixture of solemnity and constant intrusion. Sleep for kings and queens was never wrapped in a cocoon of silence. It was stitched together with 1,000 small noises that reminded them they were never ever truly alone. First come the animals. The great hounds stir restlessly at the foot of the bed, or in the great hall beyond, their claws scraping softly on the stone as they shift their weight. Their occasional, booming bark echoes down the corridors, sharp and startling. Cats, too, would have padded silently through the chambers, hunting the rats that feasted on the discarded scraps in the rushes. Imagine the sudden scuffle of paws in the dark, a sharp hiss, the final, tiny squeak of prey being caught. Even the dreams of royalty often carried the faint soundtrack of vermin being chased through the night. Then there are the servants. Not all of them retired when the monarch did. Some remained awake in adjoining rooms, always ready to answer a call for fresh logs for the fire or a warm drink. Their hushed whispers and soft, careful footsteps would have leaked through the curtains, constant, subtle reminders that the royal bedchamber was never a truly private space. Household ordinances from the period describe the grooms of the bedchamber, whose solemn duty it was to remain within earshot all night long. Imagine dozing off while hearing the faint, dutiful rustle of someone stoking your fire just yards away from your head. The church bells would ring out as well, marking the canonical hours for prayer. Their faint, metallic toll would drift through the thick castle walls, solemn, regular, and inescapable. Monks would be rising for their midnight prayers in the nearby chapels, their low, plain-song chants sometimes audible in the deep silence of a sleeping court. The sound would drift through the stone, low and resonant, like the very heartbeat of the medieval night. One unusual account describes the clamour of mechanical clocks being added in later centuries, noisy contraptions that chimed with a jarring, unwelcome precision, often interrupting dreams. In the earlier times, the bells themselves sufficed, their ancient rhythm carrying both a deep reassurance and a constant disruption. Scholars remain uncertain how these overlapping, ever-present sounds actually affected royal sleep. Some argue that medieval people were simply more accustomed to a constant background noise, their bodies lulled by it rather than disturbed. Others firmly believe that insomnia was rampant, worsened by every dog's bark, every bell's toll, and every servant's whisper. Either way, true silence was a profound rarity. The castle was alive, even when its ruler was trying to rest. Add to this the unpredictable, often violent noises of the weather. The wind, groaning through the great beams overhead. The shutters, banging loose in a sudden gust. The rain, hammering against the leaded glass. A thunderstorm would roll through the halls, its power amplified by the stone, turning the night into a terrifying concert. Lightning would cast sudden ghostly shadows through the cracks in the curtains, frightening even the most hardened of rulers. You lie there, hearing it all, realizing how incredibly hard it must have been to escape the clamour of the world. A peculiar, almost comical note appears in some letters. The sound of frogs, croaking in the castle moats, their relentless chorus audible even through the thickest walls. Imagine a powerful monarch, tossing and turning in their magnificent bed, sighing in frustration at the sheer racket of frogs that refused to honour royal authority. And so, the soundscape of royal sleep was layered, restless, and utterly unignorable. Dogs, servants, bells, wind, even frogs, they all intruded into the fragile calm of the canopy. You realize that true silence belonged to no one, not even to kings and queens. They closed their eyes each night, surrounded by a living chorus they could not command, lulled, or perhaps disturbed, by the ever-present living pulse of their castle. The chamber continues to hum, with its living chorus of noises. And yet, sometimes, The greatest disturbances came not from without, but from within. Monarchs, after all, were as human as any villager, and a great many of them struggled profoundly with sleeplessness. Chroniclers of the age recorded haunting tales of rulers pacing their great halls at night, haunted by their own thoughts or tormented by a deep, nameless unrest. These legends have etched themselves into the collective memory, shaping enduring images of kings and queens who could not find a moment's peace, even beneath protective mountains of quilts. One famous story tells of Charles VI of France, who suffered from terrible bouts of insomnia during his deeply troubled reign. He was said to wander through the hollow corridors of his palace at night, muttering to himself, his loyal attendants trailing silently behind with candles. Whether this stemmed from illness, a deep-seated anxiety, or a consuming superstition, the result was always the same: a royal night that stretched long and thin, where true rest always seemed a distant, unattainable shore. His sleeplessness became a crisis not just for the man, but for the very stability of the crown itself, feeding the court's fears with every sleepless hour. Another curious tale emerges from England. Richard III, later vilified so famously by Shakespeare, was rumoured to sleep poorly, plagued by vivid dreams of betrayal. The chronicles hint that his restlessness grew worse in the winter, when the oppressive cold pressed hardest. Was it the weight of guilt, a creeping paranoia, or merely the physical discomfort of those icy stone chambers? Scholars cannot say for certain. The lines between history and legend begin to blur, but the powerful image of a restless king, tossing and turning beneath his embroidered curtains, lingers strongly in the mind. Surviving accounts also speak of queens who were deeply troubled by sleepless nights. Catherine of Aragon, during her lonely years of exile, in chilly English manners, reportedly endured long nights of fervent prayer rather than actual slumber. Wrapped in coarse, common blankets instead of the royal furs she had once known, she sought her comfort not from physical warmth, but from a quiet, whispered devotion. For her, sleep became less about physical restoration and more about spiritual endurance. Modern researchers continue to debate whether these reports reflect genuine, chronic insomnia or if they were simply a form of propaganda. Some suggest that the tales of sleepless monarchs were potent metaphors for a kingdom in turmoil, their restlessness symbolizing a deep political instability. Others, however, believe the accounts are entirely literal, arguing that the brutal conditions of medieval castles, the drafts, the noise, the illnesses, and the heavy meals all conspired to rob even the most powerful of their sleep. One slightly more eccentric anecdote suggests that a French king once blamed his sleeplessness on a group of mischievous servants who were hiding live birds in the rafters, their fluttering wings waking him at odd hours. Whether the story is true or not, it beautifully highlights how fragile the boundary was between royal comfort and sudden disruption. Now, picture yourself lying awake with them, staring up into the oppressive darkness of the canopy, hearing the lonely sound of the wind outside and the soft, rhythmic snores of any companions nearby. The mind, already burdened with the immense responsibilities of a realm, begins to spin faster in these still, quiet hours. Doubts grow louder, fears become sharper. In those long, silent moments, the heavy crown means nothing. You are simply another human being, struggling to quiet your own thoughts long enough to drift away. These legends of sleepless monarchs serve as a stark reminder that the winter nights were as much psychological battles as they were physical ones. The cold, the noise, and the crushing weight of duty all pressed down together, making true rest a precious, elusive prize. And when the kings and queens failed to sleep, the whole realm seemed to tremble with them. At long last, the immense, oppressive night begins to yield, surrendering to a faint grey glow that creeps silently through the cracks in the shutters. You feel it before you truly see it, a subtle change in the very quality of the air, a gradual softening of the absolute darkness. It is a quiet promise that morning has finally broken winter's relentless grip. The monarch stirs beneath the mountain of quilts, their joints stiff, their limbs heavy with the memory of cold, but they are deeply, profoundly grateful for the simple relief of light. No matter how restless the night had been haunted by the deep cold, the constant noise, the vivid dreams, or a creeping illness, the dawn always carried with it a quiet sense of triumph, of survival. Royal mornings began, not with alarm, but with solemn ritual. Servants would enter the chamber quietly, bearing warm water in heavy metal basins. The gentle splash of the water would echo as it was poured, a cloud of steam rising briefly before the frigid air snatched it away. Imagine dipping your own hands into that water. It would be icy by our modern standards, yet blissfully, almost shockingly warm to someone who had just slept in a freezing chamber. The sharp, clean sting of it would awaken the bloodless fingers, a stark reminder to the monarch that their body was still alive, still capable of motion after the long, wearying assault of the night. Contemporary records describe the careful, meticulous process of dressing. Countless layers of linen, wool, and fur were donned with the quiet assistance of attendants. Each garment was like a piece of soft armor, put on to guard against the lingering, ambient cold of the stone. A heavy cloak, the final defense, went on last, thrown around the shoulders while the monarch sat on the bed's edge, yawning, sometimes sneezing. For even kings and queens, for all their divine dignity, began their day with blurry eyes and stiff, aching muscles. One unusual custom, noted in certain courts, was the offering of spiced wine or a warm, savory broth immediately upon waking. This was thought to warm the stomach from within and prepare the body for the day's considerable demands. Picture the monarch, sipping slowly, still half asleep, the comforting taste of cinnamon or clove, replacing the bitter, stale taste of the night air. For a brief, precious moment, the great chamber would have felt slightly less hostile. Debate among historians continues over whether these mornings were truly invigorating, or if they were merely another ordeal to be faced. Some believe that the monarchs relished the sense of renewal, rising with a feeling of personal triumph at having endured another night. Others argue that they often emerged from their beds utterly exhausted, their health slowly chipped away by the chronic cold and the fragmented, restless sleep. The truth, as it so often does, likely lies somewhere in between. A deep resilience, mingled with a profound fatigue, all of it carefully masked by the impenetrable veil of ceremony. One eccentric, vivid image remains from this time, that of attendants carefully brushing the night's frost off the heavy bed curtains, shaking them out as if they were snowy cloaks. Imagine the servants, scurrying with soft cloths, wiping the collected moisture from the inside of the window glass, while the monarch muttered quietly about the inescapable hardships of kingship. These were the mundane, human beginnings of days that might end in great councils, in fierce battles, or in magnificent banquets. Power always started with the simplest of human acts: rising stiffly from bed, splashing water on one's face, and bracing oneself against the ever-present chill. Now, you step into that very dawn with them. The last of the candles gutter out, their wax dripping into a final, profound silence. The heavy curtains are finally parted, and a sliver of weak winter light spills across the quilts, which are rumpled and disordered from a night of tossing. You rise slowly, your own legs perhaps trembling with the effort, but an immense sense of relief floods through you. The worst is over. Another winter's night has been endured. The day ahead will undoubtedly bring its own trials and tribulations, but for now, in this quiet moment, you simply breathe, grateful that a measure of warmth has returned with the Sunday, and so you have walked through the long, cold winter nights of kings and queens, sharing their grand chambers of stone and frost, their heavy protective curtains, and their crowded communal beds. You have felt the sharp sting of the draughts, you have smelled the strange mingling of tallow and herbs, and you have heard the restless, living chorus of guards, of dogs, and of the wind. You have seen how even the most powerful crowns could not command the warmth, and how every small comfort was improvised, fragile, and fleeting. Let your mind now begin to drift more slowly, more gently. Imagine the bedchamber not as a place of discomfort, but as a quiet, peaceful sanctuary. The fire in the hearth is low now, but its glow is steady. It is no longer a harsh, spitting flame, but a soft, gentle blush, painting the ancient stone walls with a warm, inviting light. The curtains, once a heavy shield against the cold, now sway gently, like the sails of a ship in a calm, quiet breeze. The many sounds of the castle begin to fade, muffled into the deep background, until they resemble nothing more than the soft, distant hush of ocean waves. You can picture the monarch, at long last, sinking into a state of genuine, profound rest. The body is heavy, but the mind is quiet. The fears of unseen spirits, the immense burden of politics, the physical discomfort of the cold, all of these begin to dissolve in the calm, steady rhythm of the breath. The great bed, once a fortress against the harshness of winter, now becomes a gentle cradle of stillness. And you share that cradle now, feeling the comforting weight of the blankets, not as a form of suffocation, but as a grounding, reassuring presence, holding you close. Outside, the frost glitters on the high battlements, untouched by the fragile warmth within. The world is frozen, but you are safe. The dawn will return soon enough, bringing with it the inevitable return of noise, of duty, and of demands. But for now, in this precious, quiet moment, there is only calm. The night stretches softly, endlessly, inviting you to let go of it all. So close your eyes, release the memory of the chill, and allow yourself to drift gently and peacefully into sleep. Sweet dreams, until the morning comes.